Let me call to order the Williamsport City Council meeting of July 19th, 2018. Please rise for invocation by Councilman Henderson, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Father in heaven, we thank you for the blessings that you've given to us. We thank you for placing us in this nation and in this city. We thank you for the freedoms that we enjoy here, the abundance and the bounty and the blessings that you have given to us. We recognize you as the giver of all these things. And we thank you for the safety that you grant us, the protection, the provision. We recognize our resources come from you. Our energy, our time, our abilities come from you, and we thank you for them. We pray that you would give us wisdom to use them correctly. Lord, help us in our communications. Help us in our cooperation. Give us grace as we work with one another. Help us to have understanding to each other's opinions and perspectives. Lord, forgive us for our selfishness, for our pride and our stubbornness. Expose the wrong that we might follow the right path. Guide us in the correct decisions and all that we look at tonight. And we pray that you would use this body and these decisions for the good of the people here in Williamsport. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Next item on the agenda is approval of City Council meeting minutes dated July 5th, 2018. Can I have a motion and a second to approve those minutes?
So move.
Second.
Hearing a motion and a second. Any comments or questions from members of council? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank, please.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mr. Noviello,
Yes.
Mr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter,
Yes.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Dr. Williamson.
Yes, and those are approved. Next item on the agenda is limited courtesy of the floor. We've had no requests for that this evening, so we'll move on to appointments and reappointments. We had two names on the agenda, but if I'm correct, Public Safety was to interview both of them, and Mr. Walker was going to need to reschedule.
Yes.
Is that right? And so can I have a motion to approve the appointment of Damar Wright to the Recreation Commission, and we'll push forward the Mr. Walker's reappointment to a future meeting?
Second.
I hear a motion and a second for the appointment of Damar Wright to the Recreation Commission. Mr. Mayor, how are you this evening?
Good evening, council members. How is everybody tonight? Great. Thank you for the opportunity to bring a fine, hardworking individual that will serve on the Recreation Commission. His name is Damar Wright. He's been a resident of this city his whole life. He's a hardworking individual. He and his wife actually purchased a home on First Avenue and did a wonderful, beautiful job on that property. He's very enthusiastic about being on the Recreation Commission. He did meet with City Council, and it is my hope that you confirm his appointment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Noviello, the report from
We
Public Safety.
did speak and have an awful short but informal session of discussion, basically just thanking Damar for stepping up to the plate. We mentioned the fact that there's not as much in the way of volunteerism today as we had seen in years past, so this is a nice opportunity for someone to step up into a position that's needed, and certainly going to be active, and we're thankful to have Sean and Damar both step up to the plate and do what we think is going to help us out in the long run with our Rec Commission and all the things that help keep us abreast of our youth and our community as well. So we think it's a good fit for everybody all the way around. And we send those recommendations on with a positive recommendation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Noviello. Any comments or questions of members of council? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank, on the appointment of Damar Wright to the Recreation Commission, please.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mr. Noviello,
Yes.
Mr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter,
Yes.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Dr. Williamson.
Yes, and that appointment is approved.
Thank you, City Council.
Next item on the agenda is a resolution for City Council's decision on, related to Eric Hausnecht. Does that resolution need to be read in the record? Mrs. Frank, please.
Resolution Eric Hausneck. Be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Williamsport that after hearing held on June 26, 2018, we find that over a 5-month period, Police Officer Eric Hausneck committed 27 instances of misconduct and insubordination. And be it further resolved that the Police Officer Eric Hausneck is discharged from the Williamsport Bureau of Police effective this date, July 19, 2018.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Can I have a motion and a second from, on the resolution, please?
So moved.
Second. Hearing a motion, a second. Mr. Lubin?
Okay. Good evening, Dr. Williamson, members of council. As stated in the resolution, a hearing was held on June 26 here in council chambers. Police Officer Hausneck elected to have the hearing closed to the public, which it was done. The hearing lasted approximately 4 hours. There was extensive testimony taken, and this past Monday, I met with the 4 members of council who heard the case. 3 were in person, 1 participated by telephone, speaker telephone. And as a result of that, this was the unanimous decision.
Thank you, Mr. Lubin. And I'll just say that the members of council who were unable to participate will all be abstaining on the issue. Is that
That's
correct? Thank you.
The 4 members were Mrs. Katz, Mr. Slaughter, Mr. Allison, and Mr. Noviello.
Thank you. Comments or questions by members of council? Mrs. Katz?
Do you know, rules of management have changed, and it's like changing the rules of a ball game in the middle of the game. What happens are, there are 3 things that happen to people. Some will accept the change and go with the flow. Some will balk and test the rules, but eventually they will go with the flow. The third one is some will not accept the change at all and will disrupt any authority and create a negative and non-productive workplace. In the business world, an employee like this would get 3 written notices before being let go, and to collect unemployment would be slim to nil. This officer has had 27 infractions, 2 very serious. With this, he got 8 months paid. That's right, paid suspension. We paid him to do nothing. After this was disruption in the department, and with this, I will vote to dismiss.
Other comments or questions, members of council? Mr. Noviello?
I certainly can concur with what Mrs. Katz said, but to me, it's disappointing, unfortunately, that council is put in a position like this to make decisions of this type that are difficult and painful, and they leave a bad taste in your mouth. We didn't really necessarily sign up for that type of a responsibility when we took these responsibilities on, but it comes to us. And I want to reiterate the fact that it has come to us to contend with this to the extent that we are allowed to. For my part, the information and the video that we are privy to speaks volumes about what most would consider a subpar performance of duty, compounded by elements of insubordination and an obvious animosity towards authority. Adding to this is the number of offenses and reprimands that are a reflection of a continuing circumstance that I feel the police department cannot and should not have to endure. A 30-day suspension with or without pay seems to be a woefully insignificant sort of response to an issue that does not seem as though there's any other resolution than a dismissal. Our citizens simply deserve better than this, I think. So my vote to cast is for dismissal as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions?
Dr.
Mr. Ellis?
I think it goes without saying, but I will say it, that we don't take this kind of, or make this kind of decision lightly. It's a serious thing to dismiss somebody from their job. There's a high bar of negative activity and rule breaking, that we hold that standard high, to protect the person, to protect the process. And this was egregious enough that we felt it necessary to do this. And as Councilman Noviello said, we don't anticipate having to do this very often. We don't enjoy having to do this, but it's a serious duty that sometimes has to be done, and sometimes has this result. So I feel confident in the decision we're making.
And as has already been stated, obviously, after reviewing the facts, it was clear to me and to us that we simply can't afford to pay an officer who refuses to do his job. So again, I'll just reiterate that this was not an easy decision. We did not make it lightly, but after review of everything, it was, in our opinion, the correct decision to come to.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none on the resolution, please.
Ms. Mealy?
Abstain.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson? Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Abstain. The resolution carries. Thank you, Mr. Lubin. Next item on the agenda is a resolution related to a contract between the City of Williamsport and Larson Design Group. Mrs. Frank, in short form, please.
Resolution authorizing the City of Williamsport to award 2 contracts for professional engineering services.
Can I have a motion and a second to approve this resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Hear a motion and a second. Mr. Nichols, how are you this evening?
Fine, thank you. And good evening to everybody on council. This first resolution and the next are related to implementation of the Old City East 3rd Street redevelopment project. One resolution authorizes the city to enter into a reimbursement agreement with PennDOT for the East 3rd Street reconstruction project. In other words, PennDOT is allowing the city to take on a portion of East 3rd Street to coincide with Lycoming College's Gateway project. The PennDOT is undertaking a 3rd Street reconstruction project probably in 2021 that first intended to do everything from Camel to Basin, but with the college advancing its project, we worked it out with PennDOT where by entering into a reimbursement agreement, the city can take on that portion of the project on 3rd Street, that relates to the Gateway project. So we're very pleased that we could work that out with PennDOT. The other resolution authorizes the city to enter into 2 contracts with Larson Design Group for professional services related to Phase 2 traffic impact study that is required to advance part of our intentions or desires that have been there all along, and that is to turn a portion of 3rd Street to 2-way between Mulberry and Market. Because of that change to a traffic pattern, PennDOT requires certain traffic impact studies to be completed. We did complete a Phase 1, and this professional agreement with Larson will then give us the ability to advance Phase 2, which hopefully will provide very positive results, and that 2-way traffic pattern can be established. Also, the other contract with Larson is for the 3rd Street streetscape improvements, which tie into the reconstruction of 3rd Street. And again, that's between Basin and State Street, streets as called for in the contract. The Finance Committee on Tuesday, we had a very thorough review of the documents on Tuesday, and there were some questions asked administration to provide additional information and clarifications to the documents. And so I handed out a memo this evening to try to clarify and answer those concerns or questions, and I'll be glad to go through those. There are not that many, so what I'd like to do is reference the memo and the contracts and just quickly explain the changes that have been proposed, and hopefully, again, we'll clarify questions that were brought up on Tuesday. Chris Kaiser from Larson Design Group is here this evening, project manager.
and guru or whatever. He has all the answers, I hope, that I can't answer. So he is hiding in the back row. And so, oh, there he is. Also, Dave Whitmer from Reynolds Construction Management is here. He also is going to be part of the team, or is part of the team that's advancing the city's part of the project. So we have a really good team with the college, and we're looking forward to moving on with this project. So the first resolution is for the Larson contracts. And if you look at the memo, actually the clarifications for those two particular contracts are on page 2 of the memo. And there's only one clarification or minor change to each contract. The first one, if you see there in the memo, again on the second page, midway, we clarified on its appendix A3, and that would be on page, toward the back.
Very precise.
It's actually page A3. So, and it's towards the back of the document, and towards the bottom, under assumptions and qualifications, question was asked, what does that mean, if it's going to turn into a PennDOT ECMS project, which is more administrative burden to the city, which would provide needed extra time from Larson to follow those requirements. Right now, I handed out the different funding sources that we have in place for the project, and the funding sources that we have in place don't require that. But Larson put that statement in there that the current funding does not require PennDOT oversight, and we added the sentence. It's in writing on the contracts, and we'll change them to be cleaner, replace the documents you have in front of you, or the page that you have in front of you. We added the statement, if other grants are approved requiring the above oversight, a change order will be submitted to council. So hopefully that'll clarify the concern that we don't expect that, but if we're lucky enough to get other grants that may require that, then the administrative costs would be paid for through the grant. So, I'm not really concerned, but we will come back to council if that would happen, but I don't expect that because the current funding sources don't require that. The second clarification is from the other contract. It was related to, it's on Appendix A4, exclusions. It stated that Task 1 is proposed to not include meeting with PennDOT officials of any kind, nor does it include meetings with representatives of the project team. That we agreed to strike, and Larson agreed to strike that because there's another reference at the bottom of that section that says they would provide up to 10 meetings. So that statement does not really apply. So we just struck it, and you'll see again, we provided a place for the appropriate city officials to initial, and then we'll clean up the contract and get a clean copy to the city clerk. But for tonight, there was a handwritten in there just to show you what the clarification is. So other than that, I really don't have any other comments other than, again, the two contracts are one of a series of resolutions that will coming before you on the 3rd Street project, Gateway project. And again, this one is for the Phase 2 traffic impact study, and the other one is for a contract to do the design for the streetscape portion of our 3rd Street reconstruction project.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. This resolution was reviewed by Finance on Tuesday. Ms. Mealy?
Yes, Finance did review this and bring it to the full body of council with a positive recommendation. We had a lengthy discussion with Mr. Nichols. We did have a couple of questions also for Larson Design, so at some point we'll probably all get to that, Chris. I don't remember all of them, but I know there were a couple. The funding for both of these items is coming out of the 500 and I think in this document, it says $511,882 committed by the county. A good chunk of which, as you can see, $235,000 of which was allocated for professional fees. So this, basically, as Mr. Nichols explained, one of these items will allow us to proceed with all the design elements related to 3rd Street and other parts of the Lake Coleman College Gateway project, aside from the actual street. which PennDOT will take care of. And the other item will allow us to continue to pursue two-way traffic on that one little block between Mulberry and Market via further study with Larson Design. And both contracts will be funded out of the county's contribution to the project. And Mr. Nichols, I'm assuming the reason that we got a copy of the resolution in the memo was simply to clarify that there won't be any issue with us using the county funding.
Yeah, I didn't mention that.
I asked if we needed county approval or to direct the funding in any particular project, and Mr. Nichols said no, that we could use it for whatever we needed. As long as both of these items will then count as matching some portion of state or federal funding later on in the project. And what else did we discuss? We did discuss, I've had multiple queries related to making certain that bike lanes are a part of the finished project along 3rd Street and as much as possible along Basin, and perhaps not bike lanes, but at least a shared access route. So Mr. Nichols assured me that we are continuing to assert that with PennDOT. Mr. Kaiser, I wanted to kind of follow up on that with you, because I think you'll be the connection with Dewberry, right? That if I'm reading the contract with Larson properly, Larson will be coordinating with Dewberry, who's doing the design on
Dewberry is
PennDOT's
doing the
side.
design of curb to curb, so the roadway from Basin to State, and then ultimately State to Campbell, and up Campbell to 4th Street as well.
Right.
So we'll be working with them to make sure that room is for bike lane.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I've just heard multiple, I guess, community comments to the effect that if we don't make certain that we accommodate that concept in the early designs, PennDOT will probably never allow us to put the bike lane there. So, so we need to make sure we keep reiterating it. And then I know the Basin isn't wide enough, but we are looking as well.
In Basin, it's been accommodated as far as the width is there, but still working with the district on how to handle from 3rd to Via Bella. Canal Street.
Right, precisely. And then I'm assuming, since you'll be doing everything but the curb-to-curb design, well, maybe not you personally, sorry, Chris, but we talked a lot in the initial stages of the Gateway project about pedestrian access and stormwater management elements especially in the streetscape. That is to say, rain gardens, making certain we talked about curb bump outs to make the passage across 3rd Street narrower for pedestrians, and we're going to continue to bear that in mind, obviously, in our preliminary.
There will be some planting efforts similar to what was done on William Street. There won't be specific quote-unquote rain gardens based on that PennDOT owns the drainage there. So we will be doing, I don't want to use the word rain garden, but we will make planting accommodations in certain areas where the grading allows. Again, like similar to William Street, what we did by DEP's building and across from Train Transit. So.
Got it. By the way, I was walking up William Street alongside Coles, and the little garden area that you put in there looks fantastic. It looks nice, so thank you.
No, thank you.
But and then the other discussion that we'd had with Mr. Nichols is that the design for the proposed Russell Inn Park is not included in this contract.
No.
But there is some, I believe, kind of looking into utilities that underlie that lot, which is why, okay.
Yes. As far as power supplies for lighting and how lighting's going to work, we're also looking with, as you know, there's a funding supply for Willow Street, so we're looking to make accommodations for when Willow Street and the Russell and Heritage site both.
Got it.
So trying for some forward planning.
Got it, yeah, just, right. It seems like it's a big project, and we need to try and make sure, I guess, that we take care of the various elements of it when it's easiest and cheapest, even though we are fortunate to have quite a bit of the funding in place. I guess, obviously, Larson Design has agreed to the modifications that we made to the scope of work, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Then the final question that I recall was related to, the second contract, the traffic impact study element, will take care of basically further, a broader examination of intersections and potential impact of changing traffic patterns from Mulberry to Market, correct?
Yes.
Okay, but that, the scope of work specifically excludes any level of design then for how that would look. So where that will leave us is going to PennDOT, theoretically obtaining their approval for a change in traffic pattern, and then we'll be back to potentially trying to design and fund that stretch.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Those are the questions that I recollected from our finance meeting, but I'll yield to other members of council, or other members of finance.
Other comments or questions, members of council? Mr. Allison?
Yeah, Councilwoman Mealy covered pretty much everything we talked about over an hour and a half or whatever it was.
Mrs. Frank is going to kill us if we keep having meetings that long.
Yeah. But, Mr. Kaiser, and I'm just going to ask some questions because I don't know. The deliverables, the construction documentation, the sidewalk and streetscape improvements, is Larson designing those?
We're set, yes. I
Okay.
mean, we'll be setting grades and determining, based on, it's gonna involve a lot of collaboration with Dewberry because again, they're establishing the road elevation from curb to curb and then we need to take
Okay.
it from the curb back to the face of the building. So we need to make sure that, if somebody has a step or a stoop, that we fall under ADA grades and we're not causing, we're not changing those grades. So yes, we will be designing.
And the lighting design as well?
Yes,
Yeah.
and we'll be mimicking the same light standard that's been used throughout the city streetscape.
So then my other question was the 65 meetings. So that explains why you need 65 bi-weekly meetings because you're coordinating.
Well, and there'll be, and that was a project team request that there will be bi-weekly, looking at
Right.
meetings to go over construction and meeting with the construction inspectors and throughout the level of construction.
Right. Okay, that's all I have.
Thank you. Other comments or questions?
Just once more.
Ms. Mealy?
I'm assuming that the scope of work also obviously includes street trees
Yeah,
throughout the
yeah,
project
oh, yeah,
area,
yes.
correct? Good. Excellent. That will be a huge improvement to that neighborhood. As somebody
No
who's
ash trees, we were not.
Okay. Damn. No ash trees, no hemlocks, no beeches, no elms. We're running out of options.
How about berry trees?
Couple of service berries wouldn't hurt, Chris.
Other comments or questions? Mr. Lubin, is there anything we need to do in particular to reflect the changes that have been made since Tuesday in the contract?
The ones that are presented to the city clerk are the official ones.
Okay. And so it is clear to the record that we are discussing the contract as reflected tonight?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? One that I wanted to follow up on that Ms. Mealy brought up, the term that I learned back when we started on all of this about bump outs, et cetera, traffic calming devices. As I would understand it, some of those would, as she indicated, maybe be bump out from an otherwise straight curb to make it easier for pedestrians to cross in intersections, et cetera. And that might also psychologically help to slow traffic down. How did you explained Dewberry does between curb to curb, you do outside the curb. Who's got the responsibility of proposing changes to the curb line itself?
Well, from a east-west, it will be Larson Design.
Okay.
But from a north-south, it would be Dewberry and PennDOT.
So on north-south streets, it's you on east?
Well, and we'll be handling the curb ramps as well. So at those
Okay.
intersections, we'll be handling curb
Okay.
ramps. But if there would be a case where they want to add a bump out or bump out is warranted,
Right.
that would come from Dewberry.
And the reason I want to circle back on that is I remember the very first meeting that we had, and there were county planners there. You may have been there out at the bus depot in the rain where we were standing up under it. And the council's first idea was, hey, let's do a traffic study. And all the people who knew better said, well, you should have a plan first on what you're trying to accomplish. And that's what we've spent the last 5 years really doing.
Don't talk about the number of years we spent.
Yeah. But we did the traffic study on this particular area. Of course, we're doing that phase 2 as part of the scope of the work as well. But in that process, whether it was Grado or you or the county planner said, hey, these are some ways we can do traffic calming devices, and you need to tell the engineers, the traffic engineers, the people at PennDOT or whatever, that you want that, because otherwise they would default to get as many cars through there as possible, as quickly as possible, because that's the standard. And so have we done everything that we need to do to convey to PennDOT and Dewberry through you or anyone else that we want some of those traffic calming devices so that people aren't blowing through there, they're staying and playing and working, and it's a destination area. That will have a benefit to the economy of that area, but it will also have a safety benefit because we anticipate many more pedestrians in that area in the future. So I just want to make sure that it happens, basically. And you think we're on a good path to make that happen?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, great, excellent, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank on the resolution.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and the resolution is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Next item on the agenda is a resolution to approve a reimbursement agreement with PennDOT for the same project, essentially. Mrs. Frank, please.
Resolution to approve a reimbursement agreement with the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation as part of the Old City East 3rd Street redevelopment project.
Thank you. Can I have a motion and a second to approve this resolution?
So move.
Second.
Hearing a motion and a second, Mr. Nichols?
Thank you again. At the Finance Committee, again, there was a very thorough discussion of this particular document, and a lot of good points were made, and we appreciate that because the team got together and worked with PennDOT to review all the comments and suggestions, and we came back with, I think, a better document. So I'd like to quickly just go through that. What I provided to you with my memo is the updated reimbursement agreement, and in yellow highlights are the recommended changes. So I'll just quickly go through that. If you look at the memo and the reimbursement agreement, on the memo it says page 4, section 3C, you'll see that, yes, page 4, 3C, down towards the bottom, we added in for Project B. As you can see in the document, there's a distinction between the Basin of Franklin Street project and the 3rd Street project. Project A is is our project, and Project B is the 3rd Street reconstruction project. So we wanted to have a clarification in terms of certain paragraphs. So we wanted to be clear which project they were referencing. So we added Project B on that particular page. And again, that's the 3rd Street reconstruction project. The next one was page 5, 3D. And this is something the department recommended when looking at this particular paragraph, and they felt it necessary to remove in the original document in its discretion, which followed after May. And so now it just reads the Department may assist the sponsor in obtaining any these required permits, licenses, or approvals. I think it's more of a positive statement by removing those particular words. Next one is page 6, section 5F. And this was, one we discussed quite a bit. We added, again, to make sure it was very clear which part of the projects were being referenced, and we added addenda for Project B. The question was, well, are they going to review any addenda for Project A, which is based in Franklin Street. And so this clarifies that no, PennDOT really doesn't have any oversight for that particular part of the project. It's only referencing the reconstruction part that the city will do on 3rd Street. The next one is page 8, 7F, Public Queries. Here we thought that, and PennDOT agreed that, make it more positive by adding the words Department will assist in ensuring its staff and consultants will assist in supplying information to the sponsor fulfilling their duties under the section. Sponsor being the city. So, I mean, I think that was a positive addition to the document. The next one was page 8, section 8A, department's obligation. If you recall, the Finance Committee, we reviewed, and the original document just had X's in there. They didn't have an amount. So they were able to provide us with the intended amount for our part of the reconstruction of 3rd Street at $1.6 million. They did not give us the Exhibit B yet, which breaks down that budget, so we have a better opportunity to review the costs. You know, once we receive the breakdown of the project and better understanding of what has been designed, that will be reviewed by our construction management firm, Reynolds, to ensure that the estimate and the budget is a good budget. And because there are limitations to change orders, so we don't want to have to bid a project that isn't budgeted the right way. So that's why we have that clarification in the resolution.
Just a quick question related to that specific point. If that were to happen, I know there's a restriction, there's some level of leeway in the budget where that number wouldn't have to be changed. But if the contract has to be amended because that number needs to be changed because of Reynolds' review, it would essentially just come back before council.
Correct.
For our approval again, and of course PennDOT's approval again, right?
Well, since we control, once it's designed and the design specs are turned over to us, we put the front ends to them, we go out for bid. Obviously, we're not comfortable with the construction cost or the reimbursement. And the other check is that, you know, if it's bid and it comes well over the number in the reimbursement agreement, we're not going to award the bid. So there's a lot of checkpoints that we have to make sure that we're, but we don't want to go the costly process of going out to bid and then we know that the budget's not going to be the right one.
So those,
and the
don't
other
mean
part,
to interrupt, but I mean, the checks and balances are
right,
there.
there's lots of checks and balances.
Thank
and
you.
there
Go
are-
ahead.
And they
keep
provide
going.
checks and balances in terms of the threshold for change orders or limitation of change orders. So we got to be very careful that what we're budgeting is, and what we're constructing doesn't have a lot of unknown conditions, which, you know, can really cause a problem. So again, checks and balances, I think we're in good shape with how we're proceeding. The next part of it is page 17, section 20 indemnification. And going through this another time, they realized they forgot the rest of a paragraph. So that's been added in. I did ask Norm to quickly look at that. I guess Norm is gone, but
He's looking at it right now.
on the hallway. But I did ask him to look at that, so I don't think, we reviewed it. I know Dave looked at it. I don't see any issues. I think it's a better clarification and protects us a little bit more by adding all that stuff in there. And it reviews our sovereign immunity as it comes to our thresholds in terms of civil litigation. You know, we have certain, there's a threshold there that you know, that we'd be liable for any kind of a problem or a suit, as you know. Next page, I think that's it. And again, you have the resolution from the county. I think that's all there is, unless there are any other things that I might have missed, but I think I hopefully covered everything that was brought up with the Finance Committee and that other things that we found over the last couple of days. So I'll just go back to chair and see if everything's covered.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Ms. Mealy?
Finance did forward this to the full body of council with a positive recommendation. The agreement is places a number of responsibilities on the city that we would not necessarily have were PennDOT to be doing the street under its own, in its own sweet time, under its own, under its own auspices. That said, it is permitting us, this agreement will permit us to finish Third Street several years earlier than PennDOT currently is planning to get there, and possibly even earlier than that by the time PennDOT does repave and rebuild Third Street. In discussions with Mr. Nichols, some of the Finance Committee's questions focused on the specific changes that have now been made to the agreement, and a few others focused on the responsibilities that are accruing to either the city or River Valley Transit under this agreement that we don't specifically have, that ordinarily we wouldn't have, and that we don't necessarily have a staff assigned to cover. Mr. Nichols was of the opinion that the agreement that we executed with Delta Development a few weeks ago, as well as our Reynolds construction as our construction management firm, most of those responsibilities would be falling to one of those two entities. Things like communicating with PennDOT regarding the bids and the letting and the award, there are a few timelines in here related to that we have 30 days to accomplish this or to accomplish that, and a lot of the sort of small elements of this will be pulled together by some of our subcontractors on the entire Gateway project. That said, as I said, Finance forwarded it to the full body of council with a positive recommendation. I suppose the one thing that we might ask is Reynolds' concurrence that they are intending to help us with this, make this a reality. But
Mr. Whitwer.
we okay over there?
I think, given that was not on the microphone, what I saw was a shaking of heads, but I think what I heard was a yes. Okay, good.
Yeah, this is obviously a project that's much larger than just the rebuilding of Third Street. Delta Development has been instrumental so far in securing the funding and will be under contract with the city and RVT for another year and a half. And Reynolds has been handling construction management thus far and will be handling it throughout the entirety of the project, it currently seems. That said, I think it's not unreasonable to expect this to be part of the workload.
Mm-hmm. Other comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Allison.
The contract, initially, when we read it, well, I think Ms. Neely said it best. There was a list of things that the city shall do in a certain amount of time, and there was one thing that said what PennDOT would do. So, but a lot of that is standard, their standard language of how they approach a project. But as Ms. Mealy said, all those things were answered. I think it's important to note for the public to know that what PennDOT is going to do is not just a milling and a repaving. They're going to go down, 2 or 3 feet. They're going to take out, there's been repaved down there before, and after a while, you noted the washboard effect because the old trolley
tracks, yeah, were there.
The tracks and the cross pieces weren't taken out, and those were wooden, and they rotted over time, which gave you dips in the road. So all that's going to be removed, and we'll have a nice base under that street, hopefully, to last a long time. So it's going to be a long project, but it's going to be well worth it.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank on the resolution.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and the resolution is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. I'm going to go ahead, since we're talking about the East Third Street Gateway project, go ahead and move on down to item number 12, Land Development Plan at Lycoming College. So we can keep kind of the ideas surrounding this project all together. And because of my professional ties, I'm going to hand the gavel over and not participate to Mr. Allison and not participate on this and the following item.
Mrs. Frank, on the resolution, please?
It's Lycoming College Gateway Land Development.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
And there's a motion and a second. And Mr. Nar?
Good evening, Dr. Williamson and members of City Council. What I present to you tonight is a land development request for Lycoming College Gateway to Basin Street. The existing land development plan is for a 28,400 some square foot new administrative building. As part of that, they will be decreasing parking stalls by 28. However, they still currently meet the zoning ordinances as far as the number of parking spaces required for the college. In addition to the land development plan, what they're doing is, in order to give them a grand entrance into Lycoming College, they have several entrances existing. This will give them a grand entrance coming in off of Basin Street. What you'll see here is the building itself, the new administrative building. We will be realigning Franklin Street. As part of realigning Franklin Street, as you see on this map, currently goes all the way down to Basin Street. We're going to realign, move it over this way, which creates a grand entrance up into Lycoming College. They'll be able to enter in this way, and they'll be able to exit out this way. You have been provided comments from the county. They have already been addressed. They have been added to the new maps. We have them stand from the county. It did go before planning for review, and planning did make positive recommendation as well as the county. Again, the county's comments that you currently have been added to that. In addition to that, this is the actual land development request. As part of the land development request, you have been provided a copy of the MOU. What the MOU will do is that will come forward at the end of the month, as well as to vacate the street, as well as to do a zoning map amendment to cover a small portion and return that to institution versus a CBD. What you're doing tonight is actually approving the land development, but the actual MOU, the street vacation ordinance, as well as is doing a map amendment, will be towards the end of the month. That way we can have Dr. Trackney present for any questions or concerns as far as the MOU. But you have been provided that information at this time. This is just merely getting the land development so that we can move forward with the construction of the building. The construction still at this point will be maintained on their building, and Franklin Street will remain as it is until a later time. And I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Nar. Was this reviewed? Okay. Comments or questions? Pardon me?
We reviewed it at ERC, I mean, not with their recommendation.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. ERC did an initial review. We did a presentation to ERC.
Right, yeah.
But normally a land development plan gets reviewed by the county, planning, and move forward for recommendation. And both county and planning gave positive recommendation, and ERC, I believe, did as well.
Yes, we did. And go ahead, Ms.
Oh, I would just say, based on our discussion at ERC, and everything I've heard from all the members of council I've discussed this with, it's been delightful to work on a project that really has stayed quite true to itself, I guess, over the course of the over the course of the last several years. Not 5 years on this one, but maybe 3 that we've been discussing Lycoming's kind of changing gateway, I think it will, as I said, at economic revitalization, it resolves a couple of different issues. The college has a new entranceway that hopefully makes the campus more attractive to prospective students. The city gets a minor traffic issue straightened out down there at Franklin Street, where I'm always a little hesitant to try and pull the car out because you don't know where the traffic's coming from precisely. And it'll beautify that stretch of Basin Street coming from the highway up toward Lycoming College, and we'll be taking care of 3rd Street at the same time. So it's a win on a number of fronts, and it's a help to the city as well as to the college. We've succeeded in doing it with basically almost no city funding really involved in the whole project. We've got the county, several local foundations, and grants from a number of different sources coming into play. So this is it was great to see the land development, to see the latest renderings of the structure, and see that this is indeed what we've been talking about. This is the vision that we all put together several years ago coming to fruition. I'm excited to see it break ground and get underway.
And it was interesting to hear Dr. Trackney on the groundbreaking. At the groundbreaking ceremony, give a history of the development of the college, but briefly, I think the important cogent thing that he brought out about the whole process is that originally the college the entrance was facing south, and the original old main was that building that everybody could see on a high point, and essentially it's reverted to that now because traffic flows into the college from the south, because that's where the Beltway is, that's how people come into the area when they're first coming to the college, and it's the natural place to have the entrance now. So a lot of things that we didn't initially think about in the beginning when this whole process started have fallen into place. And we're happy about that. Any other comments from council? If not, we'll have the vote. Mrs. Frank?
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Abstain.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Item 13, Mr. Nard, lot consolidation.
Yes, in order to move forward with the project, as far as zoning is concerned, you are not developed over different lot lines. What the college is doing has been created this way. These are several lots. We're going to clean them all up. It will be removed from one parcel. You do have a copy of the lot consolidation. You do have county's comments. Again, county's comments have already been addressed, and we do have new scan drawings that indicate all the corrections. Basically, what they'll be doing is, again, putting this all in one parcel, realigning basically Franklin Street and transfer of property from Franklin to the college. And at this time, I can answer it. We did go through Park Planning Commission, both of them gave positive recommendations.
And we talked about that a little bit at ERC, but it's basically a little bit of housekeeping, actually.
Correct.
So that the process can go forward with no confusion or loose ends. Any questions from council members? Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Motion and second. Mrs. Frank, please.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Abstain. All right, so now we'll go back to the regular order. Next item on the agenda is resolution authorizing submission of application for traffic signal approval. Mrs. Frank?
Resolution authorizing submission for application for traffic signal approval. Should I read it?
No, that's fine. Can I have a motion and a second to approve that resolution?
So move.
Second.
Here, a motion and a second, Mr. Ronger. How are you?
Not bad. Good evening. How are you?
Good, very good.
This is a resolution authorizing the general manager of streets and parks to submit the application for traffic signal approval, which would be for the 3rd and Maynard Street intersection. The new traffic signal there was upgraded to a camera system instead of a loop detection. New mast arms, new signals. It was a great upgrade through the Pathway Phase 3 project. In the past, John Markley would just sign the papers. There was never a resolution required. It's a new thing with PennDOT that they now require a resolution from City Council authorizing someone to sign the proper documents. So with your approval, that'll make it so I could sign everything and get the traffic signal turned over to the city. Then we would have to maintain it from 6 months from the completion of the 30-day trial period, which has not really started yet.
And this was reviewed by the Public Works Committee. Mrs. Katz.
Yes, it was. Having this done, number one, it cost the city no money to do all this. Where it would come into costing anything is the maintaining it after 6 months.
Correct.
And other than that, this is, again, part of something from the Pathway to Health. So we're continuing on with the Pathway to Health with some other additions. How many does this make at this point?
500.
500? So we'll see how many more we have with this. But again, it's a conclusion to something that has to be done and not costing us any money.
All right, any comments or questions from members of council? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank, please.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson? Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and that resolution is approved. Next resolution, next item on the agenda is a resolution for the 2018 fire grant. It is 2016. Ms. Frank, please.
2016 AFG Fire Grant.
Thank you. Can I have a motion and a second to approve this?
Second.
Hear a motion and a second. Chief Killian, how are you?
Good, sir. How are you?
Good.
Good evening, members of City Council, Administration, Mr. Mayor. What you have in front of you is a resolution for the Bureau of Fire to accept and expend the funds associated with the 2016 AFG Fire Grant. We were awarded a grant in the amount of $20,200 for the purchase of a PPE, a personal protective equipment washer and dryer. $18,364 of that is federal share, and $1,836 of that is Bureau of Fire share. Just to give you a little explanation of what this is a commercial grade washer and drying system for the turnout gear that our firefighters wear. And the reason that that's important for us is, as we've discussed with many of you in the past, cancer presumption was passed in the state. Firefighters are at a significantly increased risk of developing job-related cancer throughout their careers. Some specific types of cancer, they're at a greater than 100% greater risk than the general population. And the routes of exposure for us, there's multiple routes of exposure, but through research, they found that one of the largest routes of exposure is actually through the protective equipment that we wear. So as we wear that gear and we're exposed to chemicals and smoke and in the air, it's absorbed into the fibers of that gear. So it's incredibly important for us to have specific items to clean that equipment. And because that equipment is relatively expensive and it's made with some specific manufacturing processes, we have to have washer and drying systems that will function to not damage that gear as it's being dried. So, while $20,000 may seem like a lot for a washer and dryer, again, this is equipment that's specific to washing firefighter turnout gear. It spins at a lower rate. We can't use standard tumbling drying equipment. Actually, the gear has to be hung and air dried with no heat. So, as part of this grant award, we've also been, with the help of Adam and Streets and Parks, renovating one of an old oil room in fire headquarters, moving those materials out into the engine bay and turning that room into a clean room where we can safely isolate and clean this turnout gear on a little more rigid schedule. So, at the end of the day, this is going to help keep our folks safer, through their career and then, hopefully into retirement. So we're pretty excited about being awarded this grant. Just a little information about the fire grant process. The AFG grant is the Assistance to Firefighters grant. This is a competitive grant process. We went about 15 years and we're between the time we were awarded one of these, and I'm happy to have stood up here in front of you a couple times over the last year, in the sense that we've now taken in close to $400,000 in grant money, since the spring of last year. So, great benefit for us. The $1,800 is built into our line item for support equipment already this year, so we have that funding stream established, and I've been working with finance previously to get this purchase made.
Thank you very much for the explanation there. In particular, I appreciate it because I was thinking, I hope they at least come with pedestals at that price, but clearly it's a lot more important than a joking matter. I'm sorry, Mr. Noviello, this was reviewed public safety.
Mr. Killian did bring us this before us on our meeting on Tuesday, and pretty much gave us a bit of an education. I had no idea what we were really talking about when we initiated this discussion. And I asked him, as he did for us just a moment ago, give us a little bit more of a rundown and background on why this is a necessary piece of equipment. I see this, from my point of view, as just a further updating of our department, bringing us into a more modernistic time, dealing with more modernistic types of issues and circumstances and conditions that our officers and our firemen have to work in. So this is just an additional opportunity for them to be able to provide an optimal professional service for this entire city. And it's one more component adding to that for our safety factors. So I appreciate the effort, and we sent this with a positive recommendation to council.
Thank you, Mr. Noviello. Other comments or questions?
I think it is to be noted that, what's the current turnaround time for your washer dryer?
So currently, we have a washing machine. It's about 25 years old. They don't make parts for it anymore. We can fit half of a set of turnout gear in that washing machine. So we can wash basically through 2 cycles, we can get 1 set of gear washed. And then we currently don't have a dryer. We hang that gear in our boiler room, and it takes a couple days for that to dry. So, you know, we're looking at 4 hours to wash a set of gear and an additional 2 days to dry that before we can put it back in service. This equipment will allow us to wash 4 sets of gear at a time and dry 6 sets of gear at a time, and cut that down from the start of wash to the end of dry to 8 hours. So what that does for us also is, you know, after a substantial fire, we need to get that gear cleaned as quickly as we can to get it back in service with our folks. So to be able to do that, you know, more efficiently is another benefit.
I think that was what I remember the most, was the turnaround time was just, that's incredible, from a couple days to 8 hours. So we don't currently have a dryer at all. So, you know, anyway, that's what stuck with me. So clearly this is needed.
And I'm going to guess that with regular and well-designed washing and drying, it'll also mean the turnout gear itself will last longer.
Correct.
Which will have long-term savings?
Yes.
That's
Yeah,
great.
correct. So the gear still has a lifespan of 10 years.
Okay.
But, you know, obviously, regular maintenance on that gear, there is numerous times where it doesn't last us that 10 years, just because of use and because of wear. You know, so with this, again, this is going to be very specific to how it cleans the gear. It's simple for our personnel to use. It's single push button, automatic detergent dispensing. I mean, I've learned more about washing machines than I ever wanted to know. But, you know, so it will definitely, you know, it will definitely help in that area to extend the life of our turnout gear also.
Great. Mrs. Katz?
By any chance, does this do anything with decontamination at all?
Yes, it does. Yep, so this will also, what we've worked, and we have our vendor chosen, we've gone through the quote process, and part of what we requested when we put out for bid was, again, the automatic detergent system. So when our folks bring their gear in, or even the normal station uniform we wear, if that gets contaminated with a bodily fluid that it needs to go through a sanitizing cycle, that's a specific program on the machine. So we put that maybe clothing or turnout gear in, we press that button, it goes through that sanitizing cycle with, again, a specific type of cleaning agent, and we can dry that and get it back in service. So, you know, this too, where previously our clothing, our normal duty uniform, you know, gets blood on it, may have to be thrown away. You know, this will give us the option or the ability to run that through a sanitizing, you know, decontamination process.
It was interesting today, they showed where the incident happened in New York where the steam pipe exploded, and with that, asbestos was thrown throughout the air. So, I mean, we have old infrastructure in our city here, be it buildings or whatever, and of course, there'd be asbestos and things like that. So this would help tremendously with not decontaminating and also preserving.
Yeah, and that's, you know, when we have a fire, there's not just one thing burning, you know, and when you look at the modern low-mass synthetics, everything's hydrocarbon-based. Plastics are, you know, solidified gasoline. So all the stuff that's in smoke is extremely hazardous on multiple levels, and that stuff just gets pulled into the fibers of that gear as it's, you know, protecting us from the heat, and it stays trapped there. So when we don't clean that gear, you know, where it touches our bare skin, where it touches neck, where the hood touches our face, there's multiple routes of exposure. So, you know, and part of this too, that, you know, aside from the equipment, this is a procedural thing within the department. So as this equipment comes in place, we'll be able to rein in our procedures and our operational guidelines much more in line with requirements when this stuff is to be cleaned. Time frame specifically, we have backup sets of gear for each personnel. So this is part of the overall mission, that we've undertaken over the last few years to really be progressive with the safety of our people, because, they're our largest asset, from our department and obviously from the city standpoint. We want to make sure that they're safe and healthy throughout their career and then when they retire.
I think we also want to thank you. You have gone off after more grants in the last couple of years, and I think it's very much appreciated with everything that you've done, and keep on going after.
Will do.
Any other comments or questions from members of council? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank?
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and the resolution is approved, and thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Next item on the agenda is resolution authorizing submission of grant application for the Tree Vitalize program. Mrs. Frank.
A resolution authorizing the submission of a grant application to DCNR for the Tree Vitalize program.
Thank you. Can I have a motion and a second to approve this resolution?
So moved.
Hear a motion and a second. Ms. Myers, how are you this evening?
Good. How about you?
Good.
As stated, I am here to present the submission of the grant application to DCNR for the Tree Vitalize program. We have pursued this in the past, and a letter of intent was submitted prior to the May 1st deadline to DCNR for the 2019 year grant. The city was then invited to submit a full application for a tree planting grant, otherwise known as the Tree Vitalize grant. Within this application, the city will be requesting funding for 80 trees and water bags. Location of tree plantings include Little League Boulevard in the areas from Camp L Street to Market Street, Mulberry Street from Washington Boulevard to Brandon Place, Hepburn from Huffman to Maple, First Ave and Second Ave from Rural to High, also including 3 parks of Memorial, Young's Woods, and Shaw Place. The total project costs include $32,766.68, with the total grant funding request of $8,281. This application was reviewed by Finance Committee.
Thank you. Ms. Mealy?
Finance did review this and forwarded to the full body of council with a positive recommendation. As Ms. Myers mentioned, we did apply for and receive this grant 2 years ago, and the reimbursement process took a little while, but I understand from Mr. Winder that all but one of the trees that we planted, of the 75, I believe it was, trees that we planted 2 years ago, have survived, thus far at least, and I think the first 2 years are bound to be the hardest, especially. So that's exciting. That, I think, bodes well for the upcoming 80 trees, and we were out yesterday on Little League Boulevard. This particular grant will plant trees, but not as thickly as the ash trees have been planted on Little League Boulevard currently. But I think what we're contemplating is sort of spacing out over a couple of years plantings on Little League to give us a few different years, slightly different ages of trees in there, and also to stage out the amount of work that's going to be involved with the project. We were looking at, initially we had, 118 trees planted on this stretch of Little League. It's a lot of trees. Anyway, that said, Ms. Myers, Mr. Winder, and Mr. Eckert, Chad's last name? Yeah, I believe, put quite a bit of time and effort into figuring out the tree locations and the species and soliciting the bids. Hopefully we're successful and we can add to the city's complement of young street trees, because we've got a bunch that are sort of aging out right now, or just dying from plague. And that's everything.
Thank you. Comments or questions from other members of council? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank, please.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and the resolution is approved. Thank you, Ms. Myers. If I've got this right, that brings us to item number 14, a certificate of appropriate related to 1400 Market Street. Mr. Girardi, when you're ready.
I don't have as many boards as Mr. Narr does, but I'll try. But I bring samples. There's a difference.
Well, you know, he's got the shock and awe strategy.
Good evening, President Williamson and members of council. What you have before you is a certificate of appropriateness request for 400 Market Street for Keystone Realty Enterprises. What they are requesting to do is place a mosaic on the wall of the Firestone building, which is on the corner of Market and 4th Street. The mosaic will be approximately 8 foot wide by 12 foot tall. I have attached drawings showing what it looks like. I also have attached drawings that show some of the other artwork that this individual has done. We do have one of these up at Penn College on the old Bartle Gym. They have the same artist. This will be placed, if you're coming down 4th Street, before you get to the light, it will be placed on that wall. I apologize for not giving you a picture of the wall, but if you remember what the building looks like, there's 3 or 4 windows, a little spot, a window, then there's a large spot, and the rest, that large spot is where this will be placed. Okay, and I do have a representative here, if you have any questions of them or myself.
Thank you. Can I have a motion and a second to approve this certificate?
Second.
Here, a motion and a second. And for those of us who went on our field trip to the Sunbury Levee last week, Ms. Myers was kind enough to show us exactly
she
where
told
on
me.
our way
Thank
back home. So we appreciate that. The comments or questions of members of council? Ms. Katz.
Was anything checked on with PennDOT as far as the mirrors being used?
I think, I have not checked with them on that. We have never really checked for anything on that street for signage or anything of that sort. I think you're talking to the regulations from the highway, Beltway. I do not believe that applies, but I would be more than happy to investigate.
Only because when the shad row was put up, remember that was laid down for how long? Because PennDOT wouldn't allow that to sit upright because of the reflection. And since this is a PennDOT street, I think we should check and make sure the mirrors are not going to be, put this up and then have a, I know that she showed it, I mean, it's going to be incredible to see. I think it's going to be fantastic, but we know how particular PennDOT can be. It took how long to get that fish standing upright? It took several years. It upset me for a long time that that artist's work was laying flat. So
I will investigate that and get an answer.
I don't want to see something put up and then have a problem.
Yeah, you'll be able to see it from that if you're sitting at the light facing.
I know it's off, it's not sitting, but it's facing right on Market Street, but I just don't want to have a problem. The piece is incredible.
Should we, assuming the council approves this certificate, should and can we make the approval conditional on
Yes.
PennDOT either approving or taking a pass on needing to improve? Mr. Lupin, please.
It should just be approved, subject to any state approvals that are required.
Okay. So do we make a motion to add that condition? Can I have a motion to add the condition to the approval of certificate of appropriateness subject to any required approvals by the state?
Second.
Here, a motion and a second. Mrs. Frank on the amendment condition.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson? Yes. Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and so with that condition added, are there other comments or questions? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank on the amended certificate of appropriateness.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson? Yes. Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and that certificate is approved. Next item is a certificate of appropriateness related to 102 East 3rd Street. Mr. Chair.
First, these all did go through Planning Commission. That was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission.
Good, thank
you. The next one you have before you is 102 East 3rd Street for Liberty Church. Attached, what I have is a request to erect one wall-mounted sign and 2 ground signs. The wall sign is to be 9 foot by 7 foot, and that is going to be mounted on the east side towards the parking lot, where the parking lot for the church is. The other ground signs will be located out front, one on one side of the building and one on the other. I have attached photographs showing where they would like to be placed. You have a photograph showing the 2 ground signs on the corner of 3rd and Mulberry. You also have the sign showing it facing the parking lot. And we do have representative here. This was reviewed by Planning Commission. If you go to your sign ordinance regulations under section 1346.06I, there's 23 different requirements in that ordinance for signage in the central business district. Okay, what I try to do is review it to make sure it meets those requirements. Out of the 23, there are 10 that, if you review it and look at it, they technically don't meet the requirements set forth for this style of a building. Planning Commission did not recommend approval on this. So again, we do have representation here, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Let me deal with process first. As a certificate of appropriateness, are we approving the recommendation or are we approving the certificate?
You're approving the certificate.
Okay, so a yes vote would be to count, I'll ask for a motion in a second, but a yes vote on that motion would be to contradict the Planning Commission, and no vote would be to confirm the condition tonight.
That is actually correct.
I'm going to ask for a motion and a second, and then ask you to explain a little bit of the concerns that the Planning Commission had. So can I have a motion and a second to approve the certificate of appropriateness?
Second.
I hear a motion and a second. Ms. Girardi, could you explain the concerns that the Planning Commission had?
Yes. What you have is a sign, and the colors of the signs are more neon green, okay? The building that is being placed on is a historic building, stone, natural tone colors. They were looking for something more of a wood-type carved sign that would go placed on the building. Also, the location of the signs, they're not supposed to cover cornices and so forth of a historic structure. There's also, the sign should not cover windows. Older lettering styles should be considered for signers on older buildings. Go through. Lettering is, signs are encouraged to be integrated with awning canopy. Wood signs are encouraged in painting letters. Signs are encouraged to be constructed from wood, metal, or materials when you basically have these older style buildings. Their feelings was these signs were too modern for the older style building, and that's really what their concern was.
Okay, thank you for that explanation.
Yes.
Comments, questions from members of council then? Mr. Slaughter.
Did the representatives from the church have a chance to?
Yes,
Oh, hi, yeah, I mean, does he need to?
Yes, please. Your question is, did they respond to those concerns?
Right.
Yes.
And for the record, if you could give your name and affiliation, please.
Yep. So I'm Aaron Moss. I've worked at the church for 3 years. My title there is Director of Connections, and I'm actually filling in for my senior pastor that is actually just traveling back from his vacation today. So with that, basically, I just want to say, our intentions with this building is to improve it. And to not draw a gaudy attention to it, if you would, but with the colors, as he had mentioned, like that would, for us to change our colors would be similar to asking Pepsi or Mountain Dew or something like that to change their color. Like our colors, like that is our colors. So as far as the signage, the letters on the signs, stuff like that, we're trying to mix the modern with the old. We're trying to bring life to something that has obviously died. The building was sold to us just a couple months ago, so it's just us. And so we're trying to add who we are into that building and bring life back to the building itself, but also the city of Williamsport. So I guess that's all I have to say.
And if I'm correct, another facility has the same sign.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah. We do have another location, which is actually the original location. It was established in 2003 in Liberty, Pennsylvania. And so with that, the signs that we have there are basically identical to the signs that we would like to have here. So that's another thing.
Could you address specifically the placement of the signs? And Mr. Girardi, referenced them, but I'm not sure exactly where relative to the architectural features of the church they are. But basically, the placement that would obstruct view of the historic architectural features of the church.
If you look at
And the windows.
this particular one that shows the wall sign, okay, and as you see, as you go around the church, you have the inlaid for the wood panels that go all the way around. That would cover the inlay of the wood panels across that one area, which this is actually facing the rear of the property. So if you're actually on, if you're on the corner of Mulberry and Third, it'd be on the left-hand side, which is the parking lot area, okay? The ground signs would be on the corner. There would be one on facing Mulberry, and there'd be one facing West Third, or East Third, excuse me.
Other comments or questions? Ms. Mealy?
It sounds as though maybe we need to work on a compromise position of some sort or another. I understand, obviously, the branding argument, that is to say, right, that if we were to move any entity into the city that had a brand-specific design of some description or another, we wouldn't ask them to alter their logo to suit signage necessarily. We could, on the other hand, it looks to me as though there is room for compromise betwixt the two positions. The color may not be the end-all, be-all of the argument, but the signage material, on the other hand, I can kind of see the argument that perhaps we should be using a slightly different material, keeping some similar colors. I'm not proposing a resolution, and I'm not sure that we can arrive at one this meeting, because we would need to talk to someone who, with no offense intended, had spending power for the church, you know. It seems like the signage might not need to meet all 23 of our conditions, but it could meet a few more than the 13 that it currently does. The one question I had for you, Joe, was related to the flags. Those aren't specifically mentioned in the cover sheet. Is the approval for those implicit in this as well?
No, those are actually temporary banners, and they're not really required to come through an appropriateness. So they'll be up for a temporary period of time and then be taken down.
Got it. So the coloring on those then is not a part of the, right?
Correct.
Regardless. Were it me, I would be inclined to sort of send this back to Planning Commission to find a more acceptable design for the signage. As I said, I don't think, we don't need to go whole hog into saying it needs to meet every single criteria, but I would like to see it meet a few more than it currently does.
We may have further discussion, and maybe you can propose that as a motion if it continues to go in that direction. One thing I would I largely agree with your comments. One thing I might disagree with you on is you had said that, we wouldn't ask, McDonald's, you didn't say McDonald's, but something too. But I remember there was a book that sat in Mrs. Frank's office for a long time. I don't know with the passage of time if it's still there, but that does give very good examples on how large corporations' branding can be incorporated within a particular community's design expectations. Making a McDonald's fit into a classical New England town or a department store look more appropriate to a particular setting, et cetera. And so clearly those things can be worked out, and it's just a matter of putting people with competing visions around the table and figuring out where that common ground lies. And, it usually can be worked out. And I like your proposal in that, as Mr. Girardi said, a wooden sign with carved letters, but with striking color choices and font choices that would be true to the church's brand might be some version of that common ground that might be able to be accomplished.
And
that's a great
And if I
good
can,
idea.
if Chelsea could just have a minute to speak, because she was
Absolutely.
also at the Planning Commission, so.
Thank you.
There were several discussions in regards to the color, the design, and everything. And in conclusion of that, with the comfortability or uncomfortability of the Planning Commission, I am more than happy, and you and I have talked afterwards, I'm more than happy to work with them in the compromise of the sign designs and what works best with them versus what works best with us, and to try to find that middle ground using the central business design guidelines and a couple other design guidelines that are in town as well.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Mr. Henderson?
I think we want to be, we want to support our churches in Williamsport. We want to, help them out as much as possible and encourage them. I mean, obviously, I'm a pastor, so, right, I have to say that, right? But I think it's true that, it's to our benefit to do that. At the same time, this is a very old building. And Liberty Church is a newer church. It's flashy, it's trendy, and it's exciting that way. But I think with an older building, I think it is important to try to blend the two as much as possible. I would concur with my colleagues there that I think there can be some compromises made. We want to make it as easy as possible to do that, though, because I don't think there's any question that we want to support our churches and help them as they endeavor to make Williamsport a positive place and affect real change here to many of the negatives. So that being said, I'd love to see this move forward in a positive direction. My recommendation would be the same, to look for a compromise in this. Thank you.
Further comments, Mrs. Katz?
This is what happens when, and I know it's a church, but it's a business also that is moving into the downtown business district, that you don't realize the ramifications of what you do. There's a difference than what you do in Liberty.
Oh, of course.
And that's, and it's a rude awakening to some people that do move into the city, and they're told, oh, you've got to follow this rule and that regulation. I think we can come up with a compromise. I understand totally where you have a brand that you want to fulfill in the city. My problem is the flags, and I certainly hope they're not going to be permanent fixtures. I know we have they're only up for 30 days, but I think that really detracts from the old building. I really do.
Mr. Allison?
The other thought that comes to me through the whole process is that this is also in the Old City section of the Gateway project, which, again, it kind of maybe represents what we're trying to, or what we've talked about seeing down there. Having an aspect of the historical nature of that part of the city, but at the same time, allowing it to blend in with a newness and new life and a younger demographic that would be attracted to that area. So this might be a good starting project to see
how to make that possible.
Yeah, to have a model for how that can be possible, where we can be true to the historical nature and the architecture, but at the same time allow something that resonates in this day and age for people that want to come down to that part of the city. So it could be a big win that way.
And one of the challenges of doing that, because I agree 100% with Mr. Allison, is that's an art. It's not a science, right? There's no easy way for anybody to say exactly how in an ordinance we want to make it possible for youth and vibrancy and progress and modernity to happen while maintaining our character and our history and all of that in a way that blends together and is seamless and positive. And so I hope if we support the Planning Commission's current recommendation, that it's not interpreted by members of the church as a negative, but instead an outreach to find opportunity for collaboration and build from the ground up a partnership then for that collaboration in that part of the city lots of different partners, but in this case, the church. And so I think, Chelsea, Ms. Myers has volunteered to be the liaison in that process. I think that it could end up being a bigger positive than even having just said, oh, yes, fine, go, from the very beginning. So I'm sensing that maybe it's time to make a motion to remand. Is that the right term in this case? Send it back to Planning Commission for further review and collaboration. Ms. Manning.
I will make that motion to remand, and if I can make one comment as I make the motion.
Can I get a second first? Second. I hear a second, Ms. Manning.
All right, excellent. I wanted to second what some others on council have said. That church is truly an architectural gem in the city, a spectacular building. And I understand, I've never been fortunate enough to see the interior, but I understand that Marguerite Bierman, who was a local artist, did a bunch of really incredible work in the nave and in the interior of the church. I'm hoping at some point perhaps to be able to to come on in and get a look. That said, as Mr. Allison mentioned, we are also in the process of making really some kind of monumental changes to that neighborhood. Ms. Myers, I would ask, as you work with the church to find a compromise on the signage design, that perhaps you share with them some of the plans for what we will be doing in that neighborhood, what the college is doing, maybe even the mock-up of the college's new building, just to give the church a little bit of a sense of the
video of the fly-through.
Oh, yeah, do Bill Nichols, yeah, the 3D, yeah. Anyway, only because I think it can be helpful when you're trying to envision your place in a community and the way in which you are going to fit into a neighborhood to understand what the neighborhood is in the process of becoming. And then, of course, we have hopes that it will become even more with the aid of both your church as well as other, other hopes that we have for new businesses in that neighborhood. The other thing I would ask, Ms. Myers, if you don't mind, is if Janice does still have that, I believe it was a Smart Towns document, correct, on adapting branding within historic communities. You might want to think about looking at that and sharing some of those.
I was also thinking along the lines as PA Wilds as well, and following some of the guidelines within that, as well as our community is kind of slowly becoming more and more of an arts town and an outdoorsy town. It's definitely something that I've been focusing on and really trying to hope for. So I will definitely focus on those requests as well.
That's awesome. We're delighted to have Liberty Church in our community, and we're delighted to see that church take on a new life with a new congregation. So as I said, we're remanding it to the Planning Commission, but that's not a commentary on the church or our attitude about the church's presence in Williamsport. It's merely a procedural.
And just to add one more thing, with the Gateway project and the transferring of 1 lane to 2 lanes down that road, there will be some easements given out or required for light standards and poles. So that may also interfere with the signage too. So that's something maybe we want to address also with them.
Exactly. That's an
Okay, it was
excellent
just brought
point,
to my
Joe.
attention by Dave, so I think
Right.
that's another thing, the reason why you might want to sit back and revisit this at another time.
Yeah, we don't want you to put up some brand new signs and then
have
put
to
up a couple of
remove.
light poles that block them.
That's definitely true.
Right.
If there are no further comments, Mrs. Frank on the, I'm sorry, Ms. Novia.
Just very quickly, one of the things that any new entity can do when they enter a new town or a new city is to pay some homage to their past and to recognize the value of that past. So I think, as we've been discussing at this point, that this is just one little means of compromising that will allow that to take place and also allow us to make sure we're following our codes and ordinances as they've been designed. So I think a little bit of wiggle room on both sides here will work out to our advantage.
Absolutely. With no further comments, Ms. Frank, on the motion to return to the Planning Commission.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and that certificate is sent back to the Planning Commission for further review. Write all that down. Next item on the agenda is certificate of appropriateness for 150 West Church Street. Mr. Girardi?
Yes. What you have before you is a request for a certificate of appropriateness for Chartwell Hotels LLC to erect a 4-story structure located on the back end of their building at 150 West Church Street. It is an addition onto their existing extended stay motel. I have given you all a small drawing of what it looks like. I have a larger drawing here. And so you know, the color scheme that's there is the same exact color scheme on the building that's there now. It is attached. This was reviewed and approved many years ago for that building at 150. This is an addition extending on to the back of that building.
Can I have a motion and a second to approve the certificate?
So move.
Second.
The quick question, the drawing that you gave to us shows us the front elevation. What is the front of this structure?
The front of this structure is 150 West Church Street. That is the actual address in front. That's the main entrance.
Of the addition, if this is the front elevation, what direction does this elevation face?
That faces Third, but it is the front.
Of the address is Church Street.
Correct.
But the front of this addition faces Third Street, and so that fills the grass lot.
Correct.
That is bounded by Barrel 135, Reader's Travis, and
Right.
the hotel, correct?
That is correct. This would be facing Third Street. If you're standing on Third Street looking, this is what you will see.
And so it's a facade to a existing city street then, which is why it has to be approved for certificate of appropriateness.
Correct. Not the approval of the building. The building already went through a land development years ago. Okay, it fits the same property, the same outline of footprint of the building that was previously presented, which was at that time going to be retail sales apartments on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Now that the apartments have been slowly not really being rented, they decided to go a different route where they decided to add on to extend their motel for additional rooms.
And if I recall that discussion from, it was approximately 2008 or 2009, and I do. 2012, it was that late? Wow. Well, but I remember the discussion because it was made possible by two events in the city. One set of events, of course, was the William Street development, resulted in Kohl's and ultimately resulted in Trade and Transit 2. The second part, though, then, of course, was the gas, the need for additional hotel space in the area, including in the city, and so it was a great asset to the city. But one of the discussions that occurred at council at the time, and as part of the discussion, I think, between your office and the developer, was that under the city's zoning and or design ordinance and or, basically requirements, that the frontages needed to have entrances.
I did do a research. I read through the design standards probably more times than I wanted to today.
Yeah.
And what it basically says, and this is what I can tell you, on your design standards, it says, special attention shall be given to designing a primary building entrance which is both attractive and functional, okay? Again, we need to understand that this is attachment to an existing building. This is actually the rear of the building. Number 2, buildings located at the intersection of 2 streets should consider use of corner entrances, which this is not.
Sure.
And then the last one that I picked up on this was building facade, number 1. It says building entrances must be architecturally emphasized and visible from the street. There is no building entrance over here on this building.
Right.
If there was a building entrance, I would say yes, it must be attractive, it must be brought into compliance with the ordinance. It doesn't say anywhere in the ordinance that I read anywhere where it says if you front a street, you must have an entrance. It says if you have an entrance, you must make it attractive.
And I don't remember the exact documents that were involved with it.
Right.
But I believe that the original plan and the original development was to have the original building face Church Street, but with the back of the building all the way abutting the sidewalk on Third Street. And maybe it was through discussions connected to LERTA or other agreements around right-of-ways with the city, or I don't remember the exact context. But the commitment was made that they would leave enough space for a building so that there could be entrances and a true frontage to Third Street, because Third Street is the primary street in the area. At that time, less so Church Street. Now, Church Street, of course, has evolved and has several buildings now that front on Church Street. But it was important, I remember in this conversation, that Third Street's walk pedestrian orientation, which include, and this is reflected in the design ordinance, includes buildings that have entrances and that have visible connection to the pedestrians are along.
And what you had basically,
especially important streets of the central business
you
district.
originally had two separate structures.
Right.
One that was Church Street, one that was Third Street. The one on Third Street originally was retail sales, which would have facade, frontage, and entrances and so forth. They just, and I went through probably 4 or 5, 6 different designs with the architect over the last 4 years on this. Okay, they finally come up and decided they wanted to extend the existing building that's there. Okay, so now it kind of is one whole building that you have, and it's connected, that faces Church Street, the main entrance, and you have now the rear of the building facing Third Street.
So Third Street adds another building that looks on the back of buildings,
That would be correct.
creating that tunnel-like effect that was a concern a decade ago, and continues to be something that people comment on. Other comments or questions, members of council? Ms. Mealy.
Well, I think we need to look at kind of another major issue, which is to me, kind of a poor service not just to Third Street, but also perhaps to the clientele in this case. That is to say, the only major exit from the structure is on Church Street, which does not lead them to downtown restaurants, to downtown businesses, to the downtown nightlife. I guess what I'm getting at is it's not only strikes me as design-wise bad for maintaining a street frontage on Third Street that is open and accessible to pedestrians, but also the clientele from the hotel cannot easily access the rest of town. They have to walk around the entire block.
I don't know, I did address that with them. Basically, if you look at, you have a side elevation which faces the attorney's office, which there is a door there. Again, as I said, this is an extended stay motel. There's no restaurants. There's no banquet facilities. The only thing is an indoor pool for the people who use this facility. Joe Girardi walking down the street is not going to go into this building.
But that's exactly what I'm saying. We want the people who use the facility to be able to
And they will
easily,
have-
safely, and
Right. And that's what we talked about, because that's the reason why I talked to the architect and everything. We wanted to have a card reading system, so anybody in that building can come through, go out that door, and you're right on Third Street.
Right.
And then if you want to go back, you don't have to walk all the way, you come back through and you hit the card reader and you go back into the building. They're doing it more for security purposes than anything, really. They just don't want the average Joe to go into the building and leave. But that's the purpose,
Well,
and they
Joe,
did agree to
nobody
put-
wants you to go.
No, I was going to say. There are several emergency exits and so forth throughout this facility to get out, but their main entrance is the front. But I understand what you're saying. But those individuals who do live here and stay here can get out and go right out to Third Street, but it's from that side and
How
exit.
much gap will exist between Reader's Travis and the hotel?
Between there's 10 feet.
So that'll be an attractive way to come home at night after you've been out to the theater.
Well, right now, that is a pad, a concrete pad at this point. It is well lit from Reader Travis on that side. This will also be well lit from them for them going into their building. That's what was originally laid out when the building was put in. It was a 10-foot because that was requested by the fire department.
Right.
Sure, I can understand as an emergency passage, but it's not an attractive entrance.
No, I'm not going to, correct.
I mean, I would defer to other members of council. It would be, personally, and of course, always in an urban setting, I would prefer to see an entrance somewhere along Third Street. I would also perhaps be comfortable with a more expanded entrance in the fire access area. Maybe some potted plants or something like that. Something that makes it look like, geez, I feel safe and comfortable going in there.
There is a possibility that, and again, I can't speak for the owner, and I can't speak for the art. We do have a representative here, if you care to have her come up.
And, right. Right now, I'm just trying to visualize exactly what it would seem to me, what might make for a more
Right.
welcoming for guests of the hotel, as someone who's looking to obviously promote the long-term stay folks at the Residence Inn to spend as much time as they can and as much money as they can in downtown Williamsport. I want them to feel, to have safe and easy access to downtown Williamsport. We know they don't have that via vehicle because neither of those streets go through to downtown Williamsport, neither William nor Pine. So on foot would be great. Anyway, I'd open it up for other suggestions before we talk to Ms. Losi about.
Mr. Slaughter.
I think the other concern along with that is that the two buildings are side by side that face the back, almost side by side, with Kohl's facing the back, and then now this would be the back facing the city. So it's almost side by side, two backs of buildings facing our city. It's just not visually pleasing really either at all. I mean, it almost sends an implicit message to the city that we don't really want you to see us, or I don't know, but that's my opinion.
Mr. Novio.
I don't know if I missed it or not, but correct me if I am wrong. Are there going to be new units in this edition?
Yes.
So we're having a number of new units. How many do we know offhand?
15.
Okay. And again, I'm not an architect, so I'm not sure what I'm looking at here, but I don't see any exits on this side of the building. If we're adding 15 new units, wouldn't we also adapt the amount of emergency exits that we might?
That's already been incorporated. I have not had the whole entire set of drawings yet, but they're going to be required to have two main means of egress out of this. One comes out the side, the other, or that side that you see. The other one will come down and come out that tunnel, out and then along the building, which I have a 2-hour rated wall on the one side and I have a 1-hour rated wall on the other. They have adequate exiting for this amount of people in this facility, under the IBC.
What tunnel, Joe? I'm sorry.
Well, they're connecting the building together.
Oh,
Okay, there's a
okay.
connection between the two buildings.
Okay.
So now I have one structure. So when you come out the back of this building, you're going to come out, and then
Wait a minute,
boom,
can
there's
you-
an exit door.
Can you explain which back of which building?
Okay. Okay, in the middle of this building, where the pool is.
Between the two
Could you go
buildings.
over that?
I don't have any floor plans, and I don't have them because typically on these, we don't bring floor plans. It's for the aesthetics we're trying to approve. But what you have is, this building, if you're in this building right here, and you need to get out, there's a 2-hour fire tower on the right-hand side if you're looking at this elevation. That comes down and it feeds all floors out to that side. The back, the rear of what you're looking at, okay, there is a connection tunnel that goes, I call it a tunnel, it's a fire corridor between the two. Okay, that they go out and then down the fire escape that's already in the existing building, down and out. So their travel distance being sprinklers, 125 feet most remote location from one point in. They meet all the fire egress requirements, the fire towers and so forth. So they have adequate exiting out of this facility.
From a safety standpoint?
Yes, from
absolutely.
the safety, from what I look at and what the fire chief and the assistant fire chief look at when we review drawings.
Yeah, I mean, my concern, I think Ms. Mealy's concern is very good, right? That, as Mr. Slaughter says, kind of shutting off the city and the guests from each other is a part of it, and that has real economic impact. As nice as Mr. Kaiser's gone, but he got complimented for what was a compromise back when in creating a little pocket park along the William Street there. As nice as that is, it still means a significant extra effort to get from the hotel into spending money downtown. One way to remedy that, of course, is to go through the connections between these two buildings, which are really one building, so that you don't have to have a separate land development plan. Is it one parcel?
No, it was, what happened was, they'll come back through a lot consolidation, because if you remember correctly, this was subdivided. Okay,
So it is one lot.
okay, it is all one lot. Okay, my fault.
They had the residence in, the other part was going to be a separate building.
Yes.
And with that separate building, that's where we had talked about having that entrance. But because they're not
Right.
adding that building and putting the residences or apartments, they're extending their building, would not require.
No, they're adding a new building.
They're just adding onto the existing building, correct?
Yeah, they're adding.
But it's a separate building.
No, it's
And that's
actually,
just my tunnel.
it's an addition to the existing building. That's what it really is, okay?
It depends on which part of the argument that's being made. It's either a separate building or it's the same building, but we'll set that aside for a second. But one way to get people into the city, and one way to address, in this case, we're talking about a certificate of appropriate for a design issue. And in my concern that I originally brought up, one way to fulfill the commitment that was made in 2012, even though the economics have changed about retail and apartments, understandable, we don't control, none of us control that, would be to have a prominent entrance that faced 3rd Street that would be both welcoming to anybody who would want to engage with a hotel, but importantly, the other direction, any guests of the hotel that want to engage with our city. I forget what it was that the city conceded in that process, but we conceded it with the idea that that lot, even though it's part apparently of a larger lot, would be protected for future development so that there could be connections and continuity for a downtown-oriented, pedestrian-oriented connection between the south side of 3rd Street and the rest of downtown.
We conceded a Church Street entrance in exchange for a retail structure that would have a 3rd Street entrance.
I think that's,
Right.
yeah.
That was the deal.
So let me go with Mrs. Katz and then Mr. Ellis.
If this was in the very beginning going to be a retail business on the bottom floor, then obviously you would have had entrances onto 3rd Street.
That's correct.
So why are you changing these plans that were proposed to us in the very beginning? Just because you're changing this back to a hotel business doesn't mean that you have to change the entrance to this building.
Again, they proposed a 4-story structure there, and their intent was to put in retail. in it.
Exactly. And they proposed that, and they would have had an entrance coming out onto 3rd Street. So why are you not maintaining that philosophy back then? Even though you're not doing retail, doesn't mean that you can't have that entrance, because this really does look, even though the building is nice, it really looks terrible for people going down 3rd Street.
And I guess from listening to everybody at this point, you're really not too upset with the design and the look. You're looking more for some type of entrance point for this facility.
And
And it
then-
could be on the corner of the building, and I think maybe Jennifer might be able to address that, and maybe it will solve your concerns.
Well,
I
the
understand what you're trying to
And
achieve.
the other thing, if you're going to have a 10-foot space, that 10-foot space is strictly for, that's not for emergency vehicles,
No,
is it?
it's for basically in case you need to get back into the building. And
So
it's actually a
therefore-
walking area.
So if you, because the other thing too, if you address this and dress that part up to 10 feet, that is the space there, that would make it more aesthetically pretty.
Right, and I think that's
Okay?
what you're trying to achieve, is trying to get something to make it look, there's an entrance in the back of this building that you can get to.
But if you put an entrance on 3rd Street, I don't think we'd have a problem with this.
And that's where I
Because
think-
this is what was proposed to begin with.
Right, and I think, Jennifer, if you'd like to address that concern you have, okay.
Okay.
Ms. Losey, how are you this
I'm going
evening?
to try to address all the concerns I think that everybody has brought up. So as Dr. Williamson said, from 2012 till current, the economics of Williamsport has changed.
Of course.
We presented a couple buildings. This is the building that makes sense currently. So we're adding 15 rooms to the hotel. We're actually adding, out of those 15 rooms, 4 will be 2-bedroom suites, which will allow additional long-term families to stay. If you go to any of the downtown restaurants on any given night, you will see probably 12 to 15 of our hotel guests in any of the restaurants. There's a constant parade of people coming out of the Residence Inn now. If you go to Barrel 135, they're always there. If you go to Old Corner, the Genetti, the Bullfrog, our guests utilize the downtown businesses all the time. It's, they are extended stay. They may cook in their room one night. They're out and about every other night that they're there. If you have seen some of the buildings that we have done, I'm sure most of you have seen the Town Place Suites, the Holiday Inn, the Residence Inn. They're all very well landscaped. We really look at that, and I believe this building will be the same. I mean, we're not presenting lighting, landscaping at this point, but we will present that plan, and will be beautiful.
And no doubt that, and I'll let other council members disagree with me if they like, but I believe that your buildings, Chartwell's buildings, are very attractively built, designed, landscaped, lit, et cetera. But you know, we were both part of those discussions about how to both partner together to make sure that those projects could move forward, but also protect what was important to the city in terms of its walkable, the storefront continuity.
But if you're looking, if you're looking at this building, you can't compare it to like the Kohl's building, the back of the building. There's windows. I mean, you're
Yes.
basically asking for a door. The door is on the west side of the building. In order to get the rooms that we're looking for, the rooms are in the front of the building. There's no door that can go in the front entrance. That's why it's on the west end of the building. And that will be the area that we do very nice landscaping, very nice lighting. That is where our hotel guests will be going in and out on a continual basis to downtown.
And I'm sorry, but it's hard for me to imagine an attractive, welcoming entrance on essentially, even however well lit it's going to be, on a 10-foot alleyway.
Can I make a suggestion? Is it possible that they come back, not necessarily with this approval, because I think the overall look of this, I don't think council has a problem.
Absolutely.
You're looking for some type of defined entrance on that side of the building, showing this is the way you can get into the building, if I'm correct.
Was there were there ever any plans for this that were presented to council for this
I
part?
do not believe so. I believe there was a overall plan showing the size and location because of stormwater management, land development, and so forth. But as far as the actual look, I don't know if we've really ever presented anything for this piece of ground.
I agree with Mr. Girardi on that.
Again, what happened was when the land development came before, they were told that basically in the future, the certificate of appropriateness would be brought forward. But the land development that was approved was strictly for stormwater, the scope of the square footage and everything like that. And again, initially it was for the building with retail on the first floors and the apartments above. But I believe at this point in time, obviously because of the direction of the gas industries and things like that, they're not needed. They feel that they're not needed for apartment units.
And I don't
They
think
just want
that's...
to expand that. With expanding that, it's still going to be on the same footprint. They're just bringing that certificate of appropriateness.
Yeah, and the actual use is not the concern that I'm hearing from my colleagues.
Right.
Economics change, and we have to change with them because we can't fight the big picture there. The concern is that I remember the discussions even going back to Kohl's. I mean, there were parallel discussions, of course, in 2012. Thank you for the date, by the way. It was soon on the heels of all of the multi-years, and maybe I had forgotten that it was 4 or 5 years of long discussions around the Kohl's development. But it was very much clear that as Kohl's went up, that would prove to be a barrier for drawing people through the area. And we've tried to accommodate that. And today we can see people walking along the park that's on the west side of the hotel that the city put in. And that does help to draw people. I remember those conversations. Well, we got to get them from the front entrance. If we're not going to have a entrance on 3rd Street with Kohl's, we got to get them from the front entrance to the corner of William and Church. And then we've got to get them from the corner of William to Church to the corner of William and 3rd. And then we've got to get them visually, safety-wise, aesthetically, et cetera. We've got to get them up to, you know, it didn't exist, I guess, but Moon and Raven or Brickyard or Bullfrog or wherever else. And the park has helped that a little bit. I see people coming up the west side of Kohl's and that kind of stark concrete and all of that is, I think, a psychological barrier. One way to overcome that psychological barrier is to not have the guests that are going out in the evening, having to walk all the way around the building or down, however well lit and however many potted plants, a narrow alleyway at night, but coming back from dinner or whatever, that is a psychological barrier.
Just to add, what you have here is you come around that corner and you probably have 25 feet to that door. That's in that well-lit area. I think your concern is that you have a building that doesn't have a defined area to go to, okay? My suggestion is something.
And in addition to that, how wide is the building? How much frontage is there?
This here?
Yeah.
I'd have to look, to be very honest, I haven't got any drawings. I'm gonna say probably about
100,
200 feet, about 250 feet.
something like that. But you've got 200 feet if you were a pedestrian.
Right.
Walking from, walking from Kohl's, and you went, oh, is there anything interesting to look at going down that way as I might want to head to Julie's? Nope, not going that way.
My question, or my comment to the council is, would you prefer something here that would define this more of the corner entrance? Is that what you're looking at? I guess that's my question.
In my mind, and again, I'll open it up to others, in my mind, that would be one of an array of potential solutions. I don't have a particular solution in mind. I'm addressing concerns, and then clearly, I mean, if you can offer solutions, great, but I don't know what the inside looks like. I don't know what works. I would want to make sure that it doesn't interfere with their financial model and all of that. But yes, that would help, in my mind, to address that issue. Yeah, if it's not going to be in the middle of the building, then that corner would be the next best option, sure.
And currently, right now, the guests come out of the side of the building, walk across that grass space to go downtown.
Okay.
So there's really not even a side, well, they can walk in front of the sidewalk in front of the pool area and go out, but most of them just cut across the grass, so that's how our guests are getting out now. This is going to allow even a better model for that.
Although I'd rather walk across grass than down a 10-foot wide alleyway. Ms. Bailey.
So I guess what I'm hearing, the current rear exit from the building is where?
There is the rear exit from that building.
In the current building.
The current building is by the pool. There's an exit out through the pool. There's an exit out through the right side, facing Church Street, right side. Okay, so there's a door there and a door at the pool exit there.
Okay, got it.
Those are the rear exits. Those are the rear exits out of the facility.
The left side.
Left side,
The
yes.
left side.
On the north elevation or on the east elevation?
East elevation.
East elevation.
So much like this would be, but at the other end of the building.
Right.
Okay. I mean, I think what I'm understanding is that the space with no windows currently on the east side of the building is a stair tower, correct? A 2-hour stair tower?
That's, yes.
Right. And we do currently have a spot for an exit at the base of that stair tower, which is required, right? And what I'm understanding from Dr. Williamson is that it would be preferable perhaps to see an exit from the base of the stair tower at the front of the structure instead of at the rear base of the structure. Do you, I mean, I don't, prominent, right, something, to me, it would be in keeping with the glass windows that I'm seeing elsewhere on the facade, maybe a double glass door that exits the stair structure, one that says guest entrance only and has a card swipe so that nobody's walking into it without knowledge, but something that looks like an entrance. Right. And a couple of potted plants. Or whatever. But you see what I'm saying, and I'm not understanding exactly how the interior of the structure lays out. It would still seem to me that it would perhaps be feasible to say, you're coming down a series of stairs ends at this northern corner of the building instead of the southern corner of the building, such that your guests enter in from the northern corner of the structure. Of the new building. This is the addition, thank you.
What will happen, and I understand what you're saying, and I actually did discuss a little bit with the architect on that. The problem is with these units run from front to back.
Right.
Okay, so the corridors is in the back of the building. What you'd have then is, if you flop it, you're gonna have the corridors in the front of the building with windows shining in the corridor, and to reverse the stair tower, which you're thinking of doing.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, all the windows you see here are going to be facing the pool, and you're just going to have windows facing a corridor. You follow me? These units
Yeah.
run from front to back, and the very back of it's a 4-foot corridor, which
Right,
everybody
right.
gets out for fire exits. Okay, so if you look at the back of this building, the back side of your elevation you're looking at, okay? It's solid wall. There's nothing there because it's all fire corridor. You understand what I'm saying? I have a unit that I come down the corridor, open the door, and I walk in. You're looking out this window. That's a bedroom window looking out over 3rd Street. If I reverse it, now I have to put the corridor on 3rd Street, and all the windows are going to be facing the pool, and you're not going to have, only thing the windows are going to do is shine into a corridor. That's the reason why it's laid out that way.
Yeah, our guests need to have the light, the windows to
Yeah.
look
Sure.
downtown and.
So I understand what you're saying, but that's the reason why that stair tower is laid out the way it is, because you come out, hit the stair tower, and you're going down, down, and it ends up being that door's at the bottom on that side.
Understood, but basically I'm assuming the way the stair, sorry, Joe, this is without seeing plans, and this is ridiculously complex. I'm assuming the way the stair tower sorted out is that it's two-sided, right? There's a set of stairs that descends into the bottom of the stair tower, right? And then on the other side, there would be a gap, a hallway, or is there a set of stairs going down into some basement that's not depicted on the drawings?
I believe I can look at the plans. You may be correct. There may be a way to come down and turn and go out the door out front.
Yeah.
Because you're coming down that landing. The landing's probably 8 foot, somewhere in
Right.
that area. It's a possibility.
Well,
I'd have to
I
look
think
at
the
drawings.
plans do, Joe. Most,
Right.
you'll have a way to go to the front of the building, is that what you're asking? And the way to go to the outside. The stairwell typically does not have one way.
What I'm looking for is, if you come around to this drawing, on the east corner of your north elevation, I'm looking for a little two-panel door right there.
Right.
Yeah.
You're saying that when you see me come down this third tower here, the question is, when you get to here, do you have room to go that way and turn and go back?
Do you have
I
room
can't
for?
answer that question. I don't have the drawings.
And I don't know that either, but I'm,
That's this guess goes
Yeah, this
back.
guy's gonna go all the way to the building.
oh, underneath but the remaining ones won't?
Yeah, you're asking for the door, the exit to be here?
And she's looking to relocate that exit if you can from this particular spot to here.
Or you could make it a
This
corner.
is your stair tower here.
Right.
This whole thing is a stair tower.
Or a corner entrance, as Dr. Williamson
Right.
suggests.
So there is space in this area to do something like that. Headroom
Well,
wise,
let's-
I don't know until I have the drawings.
So, excuse me, Joe, the planning commission gave a positive recommendation to this?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Should we do the same, could we potentially send it back to planning commission to look for a resolution that gives us a more prominent 3rd Street entrance?
We could, but I think we should get the sense of others.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, sorry, I'm just,
Because they're, right, all of this discussion may result in a vote for approval or rejection for that matter.
yeah.
Mr. Allison.
I think the reason this is an issue was kind of driven home for me, even more so with we recently had a steering committee meeting for the Park Avenue neighborhood revitalization with the consultants and talking about the next steps and everything. And at the end, I had a brief conversation with them about a couple things, and they brought up Little League Boulevard and what a barrier it is to the downtown area. And I said, yeah, we've talked about that. And, they were like, how did that happen? And I said, well, it used to be the railroad. They repurposed that into basically a throughway. But really what it is a northern barrier to our downtown district. And I said, it does everything you don't want to do next to a downtown. It provides a way for people to drive around it and not go through or interact at all. And, they're going to look at ways to remedy that in what they're looking at, which is good. But that's why I think we're so adamant about a
Not
doorway.
doing that somewhere else.
Because our downtown in development, it hasn't been a priority to, the buildings, the development itself has been a priority. Oh, let's develop. But the details that make everything flow and everything work together are a lot of times, oh, well, it's too late, we can't put that in. That's what we heard from Coles. When they could have done some changes, but it was too late. So it is important. It might seem like we're being petty, but it's not. These are issues that happen one at a time, and we have to do the best that we can. We have the opportunity to remedy that thinking. That's my take on it.
Thank you.
Other comments? Mr. Mayor?
May I address City Council?
Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. President, Mr. Vice President, members of City Council. Before I begin, I'd like to say, first of all, thank you. Thank you for considering reinvesting in the city. Your company has invested millions and millions of dollars, and when we look at that William Street development, 3 hotels. You have the Holiday Inn Express, you have the Marriott Town Place Suites, and you have the Residence Inn that you have constructed in the last 10 years. So first of all, thank you. And thank you for considering it. And thank you, City Council, for questioning, because that's your job. I do have a couple questions for you, if I can, publicly, because we want your model to be successful. We want you to do well, because that helps the city. How much is this investment? What are we talking? Are we talking about like $1 million or? Okay, so that's $1 million investment in the city, which doesn't happen every day. So I appreciate that. Is your company, are you willing to take into some of these considerations to see if you can work with your architect?
Absolutely, and we definitely will be coming back with the signage plan, the lighting plan. We'll take into consideration the exit and entrance doors and awnings to make sure that everybody recognizes this as the residence inn and part of the residence inn.
If I can just add one thing. I understand your concerns, and I understand what you're trying to achieve with this look. I have not received any architectural drawings on this. I have not received any of this. This was originally went through planning once. If they'd be willing to come back through in 2 weeks with maybe taking your concerns into account, changing maybe some signage, maybe doing a canopy, something to address providing an entrance here, I think everybody would be happy. It would solve the issue. You got to realize, again, no, they're trying to do something in expansion onto a building here. It's not something for the average person to walk in and out of, but it is something they want to do for people to come out of their building. You don't want, like you're saying, Ms. Miller, you want them to walk around the block to come out. They should be able to get out that way. I think they'd be more than happy to look at it, readdress maybe some of these issues, come back and take a look at it at that point. I don't believe any issues with the way this building looks right now. You're just concerned about the entrance.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's,
There is green space in front, it's not going to butt up to the sidewalk.
Right.
So there will be a little bit of green space in front.
do you know how much on your current plans?
I think it's about 4 foot, right now, so it's not a huge amount, but.
And maybe that is some room to play with, because, part of our design standards is to, have as much butting up to the sidewalk as possible. So it's actually better in some regards to have it closer to the sidewalk, based for that continuity, because that's how the remainder of downtown is built, because that's how they did it a long time ago. If we were starting a downtown over, we might have 4 foot frontage, so we can have a little patch of grass everywhere, but continuity matters and this kind of thing. But that might give some room to work with in terms of shifting some things around so that the concerns that we've addressed can be addressed.
But I think also for them to be able to continue on with their bid process, material-wise and so forth, I think they're looking for at least this portion to say, we like the material, we like the color, we like the look, this material's fine, but we'd like to have it come back through and do some refining work on that entranceway. This way they can continue on with their work to get the bids all in.
So if you or Mr. Lubin has a suggestion on that, one alternative that I had in mind was, send it back to Planning Commission for further review idea. And then they might be able to both revise this plan, but also bring forward the awnings and the signage and the lighting, all as one package. Buys time, plus then we can see it all together. But if that doesn't, if that interferes with your ability to do bidding and your planning work, i.e. slow down your project, maybe we can do some alternative where we would approve specifically the colors and the design above the first floor. I don't have a preference between those two, others on council might, but if you have a suggestion, which of the, either of you have a suggestion on which of those allows you to do as much as possible while still addressing our concerns?
I think the architect could probably have most of that completed. 2 weeks, that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, it would need to be for planning commission in a, or would that part go back to the planning commission?
I would suggest that probably just the area you want would go back for the review of the entrance
But
and what
not
they
to
do.
planning commission or straight to us?
I would think it comes straight back to you.
Okay.
Okay,
So-
because they recommended approval on this, you're the ones who are saying, you know, we don't really want the whole thing recommended, we
Yep.
want to do something a little different with that corner.
Let me offer this to Mr. Lubin and see if he agrees. I'll make a motion to approve, to alter the certificate of appropriateness to approve the materials, color, and design of the building from the second floor up.
Do it that way, or you're also, but I guess the basic design to the first floor.
Right.
Yeah, essentially, I'm just trying to create some kind of distinction without having to use more words.
Approving everything except the entrance.
Or you're approving everything except for the size of the stair tower, is really what you're doing.
But
Because
a
that's the blank.
certificate of appropriateness wouldn't touch the stair tower itself.
Well, I'm just trying to define the area
Yeah.
that you're talking about.
I would say, let's just say the design of the first floor. Because you may have a brilliant idea later on that puts a door smack dab in the middle of the building or something. And so I don't want the legal side of what we approve to be unclear.
Or approve, yeah, like you said, approve everything except the first.
The design of the
Design
first
of
floor.
the first floor, and that part is tabled.
I don't know if you heard Mr. Lubin.
No, I did not, I'm sorry, we were talking.
No,
about-
it's fine that you were.
Apologize.
If this were to pass council, but I also want to make sure you're comfortable with it, that we would approve everything in the application for certificate of appropriateness except for the design of first floor, which is tabled for 2 weeks. Is that something you can be comfortable with? And be able to proceed with other aspects of your process?
Yeah, and then if we could just get the clarification on the green space in the front.
Sure.
I was on the phone with Marriott today with a conference call, and they would love that 4 foot in the guest room. So whatever, we could get the clarification on that, just so.
Yeah, I mean, my read of our design ordinance is we'd rather have it right up to the sidewalk. Mr. Jardy's more of an expert. than I
Correct.
am.
Basically, what you want is, as was stated before in some of the other, we like the sight line to be the same throughout downtown, and that's what
And
you
both-
have down there.
And
Everything's up
both
front.
Readers and Barrel are on the
There's-
sidewalk.
right.
So if you lined up between the two buildings, it would be better than a 4-foot setback. And it sounds like it would make Marriott happy too.
I think so. And then the door would go right out onto the sidewalk, is that
Yeah.
what we're?
They talked to Mr. Girardi and Mr. Nar about exactly how that would look, but yeah. And then one thing while they're figuring that out, we have had a history of approving right-of-ways for awnings to extend over the public sidewalk.
Okay.
And so that gives you even more depth flexibility.
Yeah. Basically, you're going to come through for a certificate of appropriateness, and once you do that, you approve that extension. That's your
Yeah.
easement extension.
Right.
And Mr. Nar stated that basically the footprint of the building does come straight out to the sidewalk, as it does with all the other buildings. That was approved on the original land development.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
But their new plan would have had a setback, so it would have been inconsistent with what's already approved.
They would still have actually the square footage is what they're looking
Right.
for. The stormwater will still be the same.
Okay.
If they remove that 4 foot,
They'll be in compliance. It's,
that 4 foot of area wise won't change,
Bless you.
Thank you.
not change the land development process.
Right.
Okay, so there's no reason not to use the 4 feet, especially if it helps address our concerns too. That's good, and that's good for Marriott, good for you, good for us, if that's possible. She's essentially indicated that she's comfortable with the motion that Mr. Lubin helped me to put together. To try to reiterate it again, I move that we approve the application for certificate of appropriateness for all aspects of the application, with the exception of the design of the first floor facade. Do I hear a second to that motion? Is that clear enough of a motion for you? Oh, and the first floor's certificate will be tabled for 2 weeks. I heard a motion and a second. Yeah, Mr. Henderson.
You need an approval of some sort tonight to move ahead, because otherwise this is really confusing. I mean, do we just not give this approval, give them the option just to go back, redesign, do whatever they need to do, and just come back in 2 weeks?
I mean, that's the alternative. We could table the whole thing for 2 weeks.
I think the only thing is, I think they're looking for you to say, we don't mind the colors, we don't mind the material, so they can get their bid together. Because if you're going to change the material, then they got to go ahead and do something different. You're going to want stone face on this, you're going to want, you follow what I'm saying. So not necessarily approving the look of the building, but at least the color scheme and the material that's being used on the building.
Okay, I understand that. I'm just thinking, if they're going to be changing the design, that may affect a whole lot more than what we are
I think the
considering.
design that you're going to change on this is only going to be that corner. I think that's, I don't believe you're going to find it is like a main entrance coming in off this front, because of the way the building lays out and the fire corridors and so forth. You really can't change the way the building looks.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, but they're looking, if I'm correct, you guys are looking for a more defined entrance out front or in the rear of this building, showing that this is the Marriott. I can get into this building this way. That's what I think I hear.
Right.
I'm just
As a guest.
Welcoming.
I'm just thinking, can we simplify this?
Yeah,
I mean, this is really, I mean, we're trying to hash out stuff here.
The simplest solution, of course, would be to table the whole thing. But I'm hearing what Mr. Girardi is saying.
She says that she's fine with 2 weeks to bring it all back. If that's what you're looking to do, she said she was, and she'd be more than happy to do that. She's here to help the city.
Well, and
Make it a little easier tonight for everybody.
We're here to help her, but consistent with the
Right, I understand that. And I think you're probably correct. It's better if they come back with the whole entire plan, as long as it doesn't affect them in their bid processing and so forth, which it doesn't sound like it does. She has no problem with coming back.
And if that's okay with you, then I'll withdraw my motion and make a new one, assuming as the second would also do so.
Yes.
And say it louder.
The second will withdraw for a
Okay,
second.
so now I make a new motion to table the application for certificate of appropriate for 2 weeks. Do I hear a second?
Second.
So now is there discussion on the motion to table? Mr. Slaughter.
I just want to say we're not disagreeing with the $1 million development and investment. We appreciate that, obviously.
Absolutely.
What we are just asking for, I think, in my opinion, is for it to be welcoming. We wanted to, Kohl's does no interest on 3rd Street. That's not welcoming on the 3rd Street side. And now this, so we want this to be welcoming. We don't want back-to-back. We don't want the prison, Kohl's, and now this to be all unwelcoming. We want to have some welcoming features as you walk down 3rd Street. So we're not disagreeing with the investment. Council, I think, appreciates the investment and the development.
And one of the things that the design ordinance, because I agree with that, and I wouldn't want anyone to lead you to misinterpret our intention. And one element, I think our design ordinance says, not it's a requirement, but one of the things it addresses in its vision, if I remember correctly, is that things like windows are, even though people don't pass through them, and probably, given that they're in guest suites, won't be looking through them very often, but still they're more welcoming for people walking by and engaging with the city than a brick wall is.
For Kohl's, for example. If it had some
For
windows, that
Kohl's,
would look
example.
very
We
nice.
can add too that the windows are going to be the
Yeah.
soundproofing
Right.
windows
Oh, good.
because
Right.
we have issues.
I was going to say, the idea of having the windows looking into a corridor might not be the worst thing in the world if you're the guest. But when we were talking about the reversing the stair tower. But, yeah, what you said about the windows being there, I think is absolutely right. It is a marked improvement compared to a brick wall. And we learned many lessons a little too late, in some cases, about what that looks and feels like. From the Kohl's example, and this is a marked improvement of that. But still, there's something that an entrance does that even windows don't do. Other comments or questions on the motion to table? I'm sorry, Mr. Slaughter, if I interrupted you.
No, that was all I had to add. I just didn't want it to appear that we were against the investment or development. We're not against that.
Absolutely.
That could have been implied, possibly.
And any suggestions of that?
Maybe explicitly.
Are wrong.
Right.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank on the motion to the table.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and so it's tabled so that, again, we can all work collaboratively and figure out a solution that can work for everybody in a quick time frame. Thank you very much for your time. Okay, next item on the agenda then is certificate of appropriateness for 202 West 4th Street, Mr. Girardi.
I really don't want to do these anymore, just so you know.
Well, this one will only take 2.5 hours.
Okay. What you have before you is our last certificate of appropriateness request for the Genetti, like Cumming. It is to remove two windows, which would be on the corner of William Street and West 4th Street, and install two roll-up doors. The door structures and frames will be a dark bronze. They will match the existing windows that are there now, all going down. And the existing windows located on the first floor, and the glazing would be a tinted bronze. Okay, I gave you samples. I give you, at this point, if you look at the picture you have there, that is for looks only. The awnings will remain there. Okay, this is a...
The little metal awnings?
Yes, they will remain. Okay, this is a new product that's out. So they couldn't superimpose it on there to show exactly what it looks like. So that's not at all what they're going to look like.
Okay.
Okay, because that's like a silverish kind of real bright stands out. What they did was, they are typical garage stand roll-up doors. This is the back side. This is what's inside the Genetti. This will be the front side, okay? The planning commission looked at it and they recommended approval with the the ability of looking for a lighter tinted color. They were looking for reflection coming off and so forth. So the Genetti did go down and get a different color, and they're using a lighter bronze, which you can see through. It doesn't reflect the light as much as everybody thinks it will, okay? It's keeping it standard with what's going on in downtown Williamsport. We have black ones down on Market Street where the market, they call it the market, the bar on Market Street. You have the silver ones across the street, which is at the Moon and Ravens. And down at Alabasters, you have the sliding doors, and they're all aluminum frame. Talked to Mark, talked to Mike, and they came up with a lighter color. And if you want to take a look at it, it does, like I said, you can definitely see through it. I think it's better appearance, matches what's out there now today. They will have to come back through for another certificate because they're going to expand your area for people to drink. We'll get that here in a couple weeks. And again, this was recommended approval by Planning Commission with the exception of hopefully looking for a lighter tinted color, which I believe they have tried to do. And we do have representatives here if you have any questions of them or myself.
Thank you. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the certificate?
So moved.
Second.
Just quickly to start, those little curved metal awnings are the ones we're talking about.
Yes.
That will remain. It's the box, it's almost a bay window.
Yeah, it's like a bay window. That
That
would
will
be,
go all the... Somebody just break that piece of glass? No.
They weren't going to use that one.
yeah, the bay windows will be removed.
And all the way to the ground.
All the way down, ground,
Yeah.
correct.
And I think, I mean, in my mind, it's hard to picture, of course.
Right.
On the one hand, you've got the cool little metal awnings and that really old, almost English-style
Right.
window underneath. It ends up being, in my mind then, after your description, it's kind of a neat example of what we've been talking about for a while. How do you blend something modern in that kind of frame with that color, which I do prefer?
Right. In a building
is
of
a
that
very
age.
modern look, right?
Correct.
But by just a tiny little design element, keeping this little piece of history, the little, I don't know if they're copper, but they look like patinaed copper.
I believe they are copper.
By keeping that little bit of the history of that building there and blending it with something modern, you accomplish kind of the theme of the night. How do you do progressive? How do you do modern while maintaining your history and your character? It could look awful, but in my mind, it looks really cool. And so, until proven otherwise, I think that's.
And again, you'll realize it is a garage door, so this does sit back inside the building, not out front of the building, which also makes it not look so, it doesn't project out.
Okay, interesting. And in addition, I guess my other thought is, I think that those ability to welcome the outdoors in and the indoors out that we've added to the city over the last 8-9 years.
Right.
What year was the first one? I'm just kidding. Oh, okay. That was everything happened after Mr. Nardo.
Yes.
And nothing happened beforehand. Oh, was it? Okay. But ever since we've been adding those at Alabaster and Moon and Raven and the other ones you mentioned, it's really enhanced that quality of life aspect of not only the patrons that happen to be at a bar or a restaurant at any particular moment. Of course, their lives are great at that particular moment, we're assuming. But everybody else that's walking or driving through also then gets to enjoy a visibly vibrant downtown.
Right.
And so, both from a design standpoint, I think, and for further encouraging that, I think this is a great solution. Mrs. Katz?
I think it's a great idea. I do have a question. Is this the one on the one corner? This is behind the bar, isn't it?
The one on Williamsport?
Yeah, yes, I'm sorry.
Right behind the bar area. The bar will actually be angled at a 45, so when you walk in, you have about a 5-foot clearance from the bar coming into the restaurant.
Okay, so it's not going to interfere with traffic patterns or anything with this? Because you're probably going to want to do a seating right there also, aren't you? Or is it just opening it up?
Mike?
So all you're really doing is opening up that people can go in and out of the restaurant. It's not for seating purpose like Alabaster's and Moon and Raven.
Let's have him, since we're having a extended conversation, have him
I'm
come to the
sorry,
mic
yes.
for Mrs. Frank, who's going, please, have him identify himself and
Sorry.
name and affiliation, please.
Mike Leali with the Genetti Hotel. I'm the maintenance supervisor over there. To answer your question, yes, on the William Street side, the window will be taken out. The bar is going to be placed at an angle. It comes right in front of the window right now. We're going to place it at an angle so you can have a wider open section there, so you can get 2 wheelchairs to pass through. The corner, we're going to lose 2 sections of seating on the inside, but we have the bar. The bar is a lot bigger around, so we're not too much worried about the 2 tables. Well, actually, we're going to lose 1 table in that corner.
So you're not doing the seating, you're just opening it up for people to go in.
Yeah, we're just
inside.
opening up the
It's not like
outside,
Moon and
yep.
Raven and Alabaster's where they put tables in front of this.
Right, no, there would be no tables there. It'll just be complete open.
I think it's gonna be great. And
Thank
I love
you.
the color.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank on the certificate of appropriateness, please.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and that certificate, maybe to Mr. Girardi's surprise, is approved.
Thank you.
Is he coming back?
Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is other certificates of appropriateness for, in the Historic District. We have three items. One on 815 West 4th Street, prep and repaint the building the same colors as existing at 335, 337 Center Street, replace some porch infrastructure, and paint the deck a very confusing color called dark gray. And at 835 West 4th Street, demolish a block and wood structure and construct a new two-story addition, and have it have architectural shingles, half round gutters, et cetera, and colors to be determined later. Do I have a motion and a second to approve these certificates of appropriateness?
So moved.
Hear a motion and a second. Comments or questions? Mr. Jardy sits down and it all gets easy. Mrs. Frank on. Mrs. Frank on the certificate.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and those certificates are approved. Next item on the agenda is, except for filing, we have the Public Works meeting minutes of May the 8th, 2018, ad hoc residency minutes for May the 5th, 2018, and Finance Committee meeting minutes of April 10th and May the 8th, 2018. Can I have a motion and a second to approve these?
So moved.
I hear a motion and a second. Any comments or questions? Hearing none. Mrs. Frank?
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
And Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and those are accepted for filing. Next item on the agenda is announcements. First announcement, Mr. Lubin, I might need your help with this one. That there was an executive session of council on Monday, July 17th or 10th? 16th, excuse me, 16th, at 10 a.m. at his office, for the purpose of deliberations. And so that needed to be publicly announced. The next regularly scheduled city council meeting will be held on Thursday, August 2nd, at 7:30 here in council chambers. Other upcoming meetings include Monday, July 23rd at 12 p.m., the Planning Commission meeting, at 4 p.m., the Recreation Committee. On Tuesday, July 24th at 3:30 p.m. is the ERC. Wednesday, July 25th at 11:30 a.m. Redevelopment Authority. Tuesday, July 31st at 1 p.m. is Finance Committee. 2:30 p.m. is Public Works. 3:30 p.m. is Public Safety. And at 7 p.m. Citizens Corps. On Wednesday, August 1st at 4 p.m. is the Charter Commission meeting. And that brings us to the end of our agenda. I'm going to ask for comments from members of council. One comment and or question that I had was to thank Mr. Slaughter for meeting with members of the administration and RBT this week to address what our next steps were going to be on the city's website and trying to make progress on all of the concerns that we've all shared on its status. And one of the things that in his report back to members of council on that he suggested is that there was a discussion connected to maybe having a committee that collaborate with the IT department on issues on an ongoing basis. While we figure out whether or not we want to make that a standing committee of council, what I would suggest in response to that is that maybe we have an ad hoc committee. And so if members of council that are interested in being a part of an ad hoc committee on IT would talk to me at some point, and I can create it and appoint those members to work with the administration's IT department, at least in the near term. I'd appreciate you just letting me know that you might be interested. So are there any other comments from members of council? Mr. Allen.
I just wanted to address the levy system. And four of us, Councilwoman Katz, Councilman Slaughter, myself, and Council President Williamson had the opportunity to go on the tour of the Sunbury levee. And it was very informative. We learned a lot about their situation. There's some similarities, but there's a lot of differences between Sunbury and Williamsport. And one is all of their levee system is in their city, so they don't have any other municipalities involved. We do, so that they could make an easy transition to their water authority and just put it all under one authority. When we have three other municipalities involved, besides Williamsport, in the whole levee system, that creates some complications to look at, and we've been talking about those things all along. I just, since there's a public discussion about it now, I just want to say it's premature to go too far into that. Right now, and I want to thank Fran McJunkin for organizing that tour, and I want to thank our city planner, Chelsea, for adding information to it as well. But it's been agreed between the county, everybody in the city government so far, and our elected representatives at the state level and the federal level, that, and I think, I just want to say we don't want to lose focus of this in the time that we're in now. The funding streams that we're going after are the priority. It's Fran McJunkin's priority. It's everybody's priority. We have a plan in place to procure through grants over a period of time, but if not all, the vast bulk of the money that's going to take to get our levee system up to certification levels without stressing the taxpayers of any of the municipalities with doing that. Sunbury didn't have a choice. They had to have an authority because they had to borrow a lot of money up front to get done what they needed to do, and that was in 1993, 92. We have a different situation, and we do have a plan, and everybody's working on it, and it's starting to come to fruition. And I just so there's no confusion in the public, that is our focus right now, is to get the grants that are going to pay for this part. Now, later on, you talk about maintaining it year by year, and that's where an authority comes in. But until we build this up through and take care of all the infrastructure problems that it has, and not through negligence, it's just from age. Actually, people say, why hasn't it been maintained? Actually, our city has done a good job of maintaining the pumps that are original pumps and keeping them running and keeping everything working. We've done a good job, and we've always got a good rating from the Army Corps. It's just that the game changed after Katrina, so the bar has been raised. So we have a new level to meet. But we have a plan in place to meet that level through state and federal grants that we're getting a lot of traction, because there's 168 miles of levee in the state of Pennsylvania. Williamsport has over 9% of that. We are the second biggest levee system in the state. So we're on everybody's radar, and everybody knows what's going on and the importance of addressing what we have. So that's our focus for now. And think about developing things down the road, but that's going to come later. But right now, we're going to get those grants and have it paid for that way.
Other comments from members of council? Hearing none, Mayor, your administration? Thank you. Comments from the general public? Please come to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and 3 minutes on any topic of city business, please.
My name is Patty Terry. I live at 923 St. Boniface Street. The reason that I'm talking tonight, wasn't going to, but I had heard Mr. Noviello, and then I had heard Mrs. Katz discuss the situation with the current officer that is apparently being let go. I'm a mom and I'm a grandmother, and we have twice different things have come up concerning 2 police officers who were inappropriate with some college students, and then sexual harassment on the job. If we want to know why our police officers aren't always doing their job, we need to look at management and supervisors. And I don't think some of them are doing their job. And this is very concerning. If a mother, a child, sister, brother, father, whatever, has an issue that's being dealt with as far as sexual abuse, sexual harassment, how does the community know that it will be dealt with in the proper way when we have stuff like this going on? And I don't know what all you're aware of, but it's really hit the internet, and it's a big thing. And I've been in a coffee shop in Newberry, and that's when I found out about the incident with the police officers at the college. And I was really upset about that. So I don't know what the resolution is, but it bothers me that it's going on in our town. And if we can't rely on our police, who can we rely on? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And there may be individuals who want to speak to you afterwards to get more information. Other comments from the general public? Hearing none, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.